When a man who owns everything decides he wants more, he doesn't just betray his wife. He parades his cruelty like a crown. Duke Adrian Blackthorne rode through the castle gates with another woman's hand in his, and the entire kingdom held its breath. What they witnessed wasn't love. It was a public execution dressed in silk and smiles. But here's what no one understood yet. The woman he humiliated wasn't the victim of this story. She was the architect of its ending. Stay with me until the last word, because what you're about to witness isn't just revenge. It's a masterclass in patience, power, and the devastating cost of underestimating the quiet ones. The morning Adrian Blackthorne returned to Ravenspire Castle, the sky itself seemed to recoil. Gray clouds pressed low over the turrets, and the wind carried the smell of rain that refused to fall. The castle staff had been preparing for his arrival for 3 days, scrubbing marble floors until they gleamed, arranging fresh roses in every hall, ensuring that the Duke's homecoming would be nothing short of perfection. But when the iron gates finally swung open and the horses clattered across the cobblestones, it wasn't triumph that entered the courtyard. It was wreckage. Adrian dismounted first, his black riding coat billowing behind him like a war banner. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered and sharp-featured, with the kind of face that commanded rooms without effort. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes, cold, calculating, perpetually amused, swept across the assembled servants with the detachment of a man inspecting livestock. He'd been gone for 6 weeks, ostensibly on diplomatic business in the southern provinces. Everyone knew that was a lie. Diplomacy didn't leave lipstick stains on a man's collar or drain his family coffers by thousands of gold sovereigns. What made the servants freeze wasn't his return. It was who came with him. She stepped down from the second horse with practiced grace, her hand still resting possessively on Adrian's arm. Selina Vale. 24 years old, auburn-haired, green-eyed, draped in emerald silk that cost more than most of the staff earned in a year. She wasn't beautiful in the classical sense. Her features were too sharp, her smile too knowing. But she radiated the kind of magnetism that made men stupid and women wary. She looked around the courtyard like she owned it, her gaze lingering on the stone lions flanking the entrance, the stained glass windows glinting in the weak morning light, the servants standing rigid in their pressed uniforms. Then she laughed, soft, musical, deliberate. It was the sound of a woman who had already won. Head steward Marcus Grenfell stood at the top of the steps, his weathered face carefully blank. He'd served the Blackthorne family for 37 years, had watched Adrian grow from an arrogant boy into an arrogant man, had witnessed the slow decay of a marriage that once held promise. But this was different. This wasn't indiscretion hidden behind closed doors. This was humiliation delivered in broad daylight. Marcus descended the steps, his movements precise. He bowed to Adrian, then hesitated for a fraction of a second before offering Selina the same courtesy. Protocol demanded it. Dignity required it. But something inside him withered at the necessity. Adrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You can take Miss Vale's things to the Rose Chamber. She'll be staying indefinitely." The Rose Chamber, not the guest wing, not the East Tower where visiting nobility resided. The Rose Chamber, directly across the hall from the Duchess's private quarters. Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Your Grace, perhaps the—" "Are you questioning me, Marcus?" The words were soft, almost pleasant. That made them more dangerous. "Of course not, Your Grace. I'll see to it immediately." Adrian smiled, satisfied, and guided Selina up the steps. She glanced back once at the assembled staff, her expression unreadable, then disappeared through the oak doors. The courtyard remained silent for a long moment after they left. Then, like a dam breaking, the whispers began. Upstairs in the Duchess's private study overlooking the eastern gardens, Evelyn Ashcombe sat perfectly still at her writing desk. She'd watched the entire scene from her window, hidden behind thick velvet curtains. Her hands, folded in her lap, did not tremble. Her breathing remained steady. Her face betrayed nothing. She was 38 years old, slender and graceful, with dark blonde hair pinned in an elegant chignon and gray eyes that missed nothing. Once, those eyes had sparkled with hope. Once, she'd believed that intelligence and compassion and loyalty mattered more than beauty or youth or pliability. Once, she'd stood in a cathedral and promised to love Adrian Blackthorne until death parted them. That version of Evelyn had died slowly, suffocated by years of neglect and casual cruelty, and the grinding realization that she'd married a man who saw her as property, not partner. The woman sitting at the desk now was something else entirely. Her lady's maid, Catherine, entered quietly, her young face twisted with barely suppressed rage. "My lady, I can't believe, how dare he?" Evelyn raised one hand and Catherine fell silent. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, almost gentle. "Did you prepare the tea service for this evening's welcome banquet?" Catherine blinked, thrown by the question. "Yes, my lady. Everything is ready. But surely you're not going to—" "I am. And you will ensure that every detail is perfect. The silver polished, the flowers fresh, the wine decanted properly. Do you understand?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "My lady, you don't have to endure this. You could—" Evelyn turned then, and the look in her eyes stopped Catherine mid-sentence. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was something colder, more patient, infinitely more dangerous. "I will endure nothing, Catherine. I will attend the banquet tonight because that is what a duchess does. I will smile because that is what is expected. And I will watch very carefully while my husband makes a fool of himself in front of the entire court. Now go, make sure everything is perfect." Catherine curtsied and fled, leaving Evelyn alone once more. Evelyn returned to the window, watching as servants scurried across the courtyard below, carrying luggage, whispering behind their hands, stealing glances at the castle doors. She'd spent 15 years building this household, earning the loyalty of every cook and gardener and chambermaid through small kindnesses and fair treatment. She knew their names, their families, their struggles. She remembered birthdays and mourned losses and interceded when Adrian's temper threatened their livelihoods. They loved her. Adrian had no idea what that meant. He thought power came from titles and money and the ability to intimidate. He'd never understood that real power, the kind that moved mountains and toppled kingdoms, came from the people others ignored. Evelyn opened the top drawer of her desk and removed a small leather journal. Inside, written in her precise handwriting, were names, dates, numbers, evidence, connections, weaknesses. She'd been compiling it for 3 years, ever since she'd first confirmed Adrian's infidelity. Not out of hope for reconciliation, that ship had sailed long ago, but out of strategy. Because Evelyn Ashcombe had learned something crucial about survival. When you're married to a predator, you don't run, you don't cry, you don't beg, you wait, you watch, you prepare. And when the moment is right, you strike so precisely that your enemy never sees it coming. She closed the journal and locked it away. Tonight's banquet would be agony. She knew that. Adrian would flaunt Selina like a prize, would ignore Evelyn or worse, acknowledge her with the kind of performative courtesy that made a mockery of their marriage vows. The nobles would watch with hungry eyes, savoring the scandal, already calculating how this shift in power might benefit them. Let them watch. Let them think she was defeated. Because every moment of Adrian's arrogance was another nail in his coffin, and Evelyn had all the time in the world. But the great hall of Ravenspire Castle had been built 3 centuries ago by a duke who believed architecture should inspire awe and fear in equal measure. Vaulted ceilings soared 40 feet overhead, supported by stone columns carved with the Blackthorn family crest, a raven clutching a thorn bush, wings spread in eternal defiance. Enormous chandeliers dripped with crystals that caught the light of 100 candles, casting fractured rainbows across the polished floor. Tapestries depicting ancient battles lined the walls, their threads still vibrant despite centuries of age. It was a room designed for power. Tonight, it reeked of betrayal. Evelyn descended the central staircase precisely 15 minutes after the first guests arrived, timing her entrance to avoid overshadowing Adrian while ensuring she couldn't be ignored. She wore midnight blue velvet, high-necked and long-sleeved, with silver embroidery that caught the light like frost. Her jewelry was understated, her mother's pearls, a simple sapphire ring. Her hair was swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. She looked every inch a duchess. She looked untouchable. The whispers started immediately. Nobles who'd been laughing raucously moments before lowered their voices, their eyes tracking her progress across the hall. Some faces showed pity, others showed calculation. A few showed something uglier, satisfaction at watching a proud woman brought low. Evelyn's expression never wavered. She glided through the crowd with the grace of a woman who'd been trained from birth for exactly this kind of performance, greeting guests with perfect courtesy, her smile never reaching her eyes. Lord Pemberton, the king's chief adviser, approached with his wife. His face was carefully neutral. "Your Grace, you look radiant as always," says. His wife, Lady Amelia, was less diplomatic. Her eyes were bright with malicious curiosity. "We were so surprised to hear about the Duke's guest. Such an unusual arrangement." Evelyn's smile didn't waver. "The Duke is generous with his hospitality. I'm sure Miss Vale appreciates his kindness." The deflection was masterful, acknowledging nothing, conceding nothing, offering nothing for gossip to feed on. Lady Amelia's mouth tightened with frustration, but before she could press further, trumpets sounded. Adrian entered from the far doors. He'd changed into formal attire, black and silver, the Blackthorn colors, with a crimson sash denoting his rank. He looked magnificent, and he knew it. His presence commanded the room instantly, silencing conversations, drawing every eye. And beside him, her hand resting on his arm like she belonged there, walked Selina Vale. She wore red, not burgundy or wine or any modest shade that might have suggested discretion. Pure, brilliant, blood-red silk that clung to her body and set off her auburn hair like flame. She wore the Duke's emeralds, jewels that should have belonged to Evelyn, that had been gifted to the Blackthorn family by the old queen herself, around her throat and wrists. The room collectively inhaled. Adrian led Selina directly to the high table, where two throne-like chairs sat elevated above the rest of the hall. Traditionally, the Duke and Duchess sat there together. Tonight, Adrian gestured Selina to the Duchess's seat. She took it without hesitation. The nobles stared. Servants frozen mid-service gawked. Even the musicians faltered, their playing dissolving into discordant notes before stopping entirely. Adrian surveyed the room with satisfaction, then his gaze found Evelyn. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed he'd won, who thought he'd finally broken the one thing standing in the way of his absolute freedom. He gestured toward a chair at the far end of the high table, a seat usually reserved for visiting minor nobility or honored guests, but certainly not for the lady of the castle. "Join us, Evelyn. Don't be shy." The entire room watched to see what she would do. Evelyn held his gaze for 3 heartbeats. 4, 5. Then she inclined her head gracefully and walked toward the high table, her footsteps the only sound in the vast hall. She took the offered seat without a word, arranged her skirts with elegant precision, and folded her hands in her lap. Her face remained serene. Inside, behind the carefully constructed mask, something ancient and furious stirred. Adrian raised his glass. To new beginnings. The nobles, desperate to ease the tension, quickly raised theirs. To new beginnings. Selina laughed, bright and delighted, and leaned close to whisper something in Adrian's ear. He grinned, his hand covering hers on the armrest. Evelyn took a sip of wine and said nothing. The feast began. Over the next 2 hours, Evelyn endured a masterclass in calculated humiliation. Adrian made no attempt at subtlety. He fed Selina choice morsels from his own plate, his fingers lingering at her lips. He listened to her opinions on politics and trade with exaggerated attentiveness, nodding thoughtfully at insights that were, at best, superficial. He called for musicians to play her favorite songs, for servants to bring her specific wines, for the chef to prepare dishes to her taste, and through it all, he addressed Evelyn exactly 3 times. Once to ask her to pass the salt, once to comment that she looked tired, perhaps she should retire early, once to introduce her to Selina as my wife, said with the same tone one might use to say my old hunting dog. Selina, for her part, played her role with practiced skill. She wasn't overtly cruel, that would have been too obvious. Instead, she was gracious, even sympathetic. When Evelyn passed the salt, Selina thanked her warmly. When Adrian made his cutting comments, Selina touched his arm gently, as if to soften the blow. She looked at Evelyn with eyes that managed to convey both pity and triumph simultaneously. It was a performance designed to twist the knife while appearing magnanimous. The nobles watched it all with greedy fascination. Some laughed too loudly at Adrian's jokes, eager to signal their alliance with power. Others exchanged significant glances, already calculating how this scandal might be leveraged. A few, very few, looked uncomfortable. their eyes sliding away from Evelyn's composed face as if unable to bear witness to her degradation. But Evelyn noticed something else too. She noticed Marcus standing near the servants' entrance, his weathered face tight with suppressed rage. She noticed Catherine hovering near the wine decanters, her young hands trembling as she poured. She noticed Cook watching from the kitchen doorway, her expression murderous. She noticed the stable master, the head gardener, the laundry mistress, all the people who kept this castle running, staring at Adrian and Selina with barely concealed contempt. The nobles might be calculating. The servants were choosing sides, and they weren't choosing Adrian. Near the end of the meal, Lord Pemberton stood to offer a toast. His face was carefully diplomatic, but his eyes kept darting to Evelyn, as if checking for cracks in her composure. "To Duke Adrian Blackthorne," he began, his voice carrying across the hall. "A man of vision and boldness, who has brought prosperity to this realm and honor to his name. May his future be bright and his choices wise." It was a toast that managed to be both flattering and vaguely threatening, a reminder that choices had consequences, even for dukes. Adrian raised his glass, oblivious to the subtext. "To the future!" The nobles echoed him. "To the future!" Selina beamed. Evelyn set down her glass untouched and rose smoothly from her chair. The movement caught Adrian's attention. He frowned. "Where are you going?" Her voice was steady, almost pleasant. "I find I'm quite tired after all, Adrian. Thank you for the suggestion. I'll retire and leave you to your celebrations." She turned to face the assembled nobles, her posture perfect, her expression serene. "My lords, my ladies, please enjoy the remainder of the evening. I hope the hospitality of Ravenspire Castle meets your expectations." Then she executed a flawless curtsy, not to Adrian, but to the room at large, and walked toward the doors. Every eye followed her. She moved with unhurried grace, her spine straight, her head high, her hands loose at her sides. She looked neither defeated nor defiant. She simply looked like a woman who had decided she had better places to be. It was somehow more devastating than if she'd raged or wept. Behind her, she heard Selina's voice, too loud, brittle with sudden uncertainty. "Well, I suppose some people can't handle change." And Adrian's response, jovial but with an edge. "Don't worry about Evelyn. She'll adjust eventually. She always does." Evelyn's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. That was where he was wrong. She would adjust nothing. She would simply destroy him. 3 days passed. 3 days during which Adrian played house with Selina like a boy with a new toy, oblivious to the current shifting beneath his feet. He took her riding through the estate, showing off the lands as if they were his personal achievement rather than centuries of Blackthorne inheritance. He invited nobles to dinner and seated Selina at his right hand while Evelyn was relegated to hosting minor guests in a separate parlor. He showered Selina with gifts, gowns and jewels, and a white mare that cost more than the annual salary of every servant in the castle combined. And with each extravagant gesture, each public display of favoritism, each casual dismissal of his wife, Adrian believed he was asserting his dominance. What he didn't see was the network beginning to collapse around him. It started small. Lord Harwick, who controlled the northern trade routes, sent word that he'd be unable to attend the hunting party Adrian had planned. Lady Somerset, whose family held significant influence at court, declined Selina's invitation to tea with a polite but cool excuse. The banker who'd been extending Adrian credit for months suddenly requested a meeting to discuss outstanding debts. Adrian dismissed it all as coincidence. Evelyn knew better. She spent those 3 days in motion, though to any casual observer she appeared to be doing nothing at all. She took tea with Lady Somerset, not at the castle, but at Somerset's private residence, and spoke quietly about family honor and the importance of supporting women who'd been wronged. She sent a carefully worded letter to Lord Harwick's wife, reminding her of the time Evelyn had intervened when Harwick's gambling debts threatened to destroy them, and how loyalty should be a two-way street. She visited the banker personally, bringing with her meticulously kept records of the estate's finances, records that proved Adrian had been siphoning money into personal accounts for years. These weren't dramatic confrontations. They were quiet conversations over tea and wine, accompanied by careful questions and meaningful silences. Evelyn never asked for anything directly. She simply reminded people of connections, debts, shared interests. She gently pointed out how Adrian's recklessness might affect them. She let them reach their own conclusions. And one by one, they did. Meanwhile, inside this castle, the servants had stopped even pretending to respect Selena. Meals were served cold. Laundry was lost. Requested items arrived hours late or not at all. When Selena complained, servants apologized profusely and blamed overwork or confusion, their faces masks of innocence while their eyes burned with satisfaction. Adrian noticed none of it. He was too busy basking in what he believed was victory. On the fourth morning, Marcus found Evelyn in her private study, reviewing documents by the early light. He closed the door carefully behind him and spoke in a low voice. "My lady, the household accounts are secure. The ones Adrian has access to show only routine expenses. The true records are locked in your private vault. He won't know what hit him until it's too late." Evelyn didn't look up from her papers. "And the correspondence with Lord Pemberton? Sealed and ready for delivery. Your letter details Adrian's foreign merchant dealings, the ones that violate the king's trade sanctions. Pemberton won't be able to ignore it, especially with the evidence you've compiled." "Good. And Selena's background investigation?" Marcus's weathered face twisted with something like satisfaction. "Fascinating reading, my lady. It seems Miss Vale has made quite a career of attaching herself to wealthy men. 3 engagements broken, 2 lawsuits settled quietly, 1 very interesting connection to a group of merchants who've been trying to gain access to Blackthorn's shipping contracts for years." Evelyn finally looked up, her gray eyes sharp. "So she's not just a mistress, she's a plant. That would be my assessment, yes." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "Does Adrian know?" Marcus snorted. "Adrian believes he's irresistible. He thinks she fell for his charm. The fool can't see a scheme when it's climbing into his bed." For the first time in days, Evelyn smiled. A real smile, cold and sharp as winter steel. "Then we'll let him keep believing that, right up until it destroys him." There was a knock at the door. Catherine entered, her face flushed with excitement. "My lady, you won't believe what I just overheard. Selena and Adrian were arguing in the Rose Chamber. She was demanding he give her access to the estate management accounts. She said if he really loved her, he'd trust her to help run things. He actually looked like he was considering it." Evelyn stood smoothly, her expression returning to its usual composed mask. "Perfect. That accelerates our timeline. Catherine, I need you to do something for me. Anything, my lady. Tomorrow is the Winter Masquerade Ball. I want you to ensure that certain documents accidentally find their way into Lord Pemberton's hands before the dancing begins. Can you do that discreetly?" Catherine's eyes gleamed with understanding. "Consider it done. And Marcus, I'll need you to make sure every noble house that matters is in attendance. Use whatever invitations or leverage necessary. I want witnesses." Marcus bowed. "It will be my pleasure, my lady." They both left, moving with purpose, leaving Evelyn alone once more. She walked to the window and looked out over the winter gardens. Snow had begun to fall, soft and relentless, covering the grounds in white. In the distance, she could see Adrian and Selena walking arm in arm along the hedge maze, laughing about something, utterly oblivious to the storm gathering around them. Evelyn pressed one palm against the cold glass. 15 years. 15 years she'd been the perfect Duchess, the loyal wife. The woman who stood beside Adrian through every political crisis and financial disaster. She'd used her family connections to secure his position at court. She'd negotiated trade deals when his temper drove merchants away. She'd soothed offended nobles, balanced impossible budgets, turned a crumbling estate into a profitable enterprise. And he'd repaid her with indifference, neglect, and now this final, unforgivable humiliation. Men like Adrian believed power was about force, about dominance, about making others bend to your will. They were wrong. Real power was about patience, strategy, knowing exactly where to strike so the whole structure collapsed. And Evelyn had spent years identifying every crack in Adrian's foundation. Tomorrow night, at the Winter Masquerade Ball, in front of the entire kingdom's elite, she would begin demolishing him. Not with rage, not with tears, but with truth, delivered with surgical precision. The snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in deceptive peace. The day of the Winter Masquerade Ball dawned clear and bitterly cold. Ravenspire Castle buzzed with frantic activity as servants prepared for the most important social event of the season. Every noble family within 100 miles would attend, along with foreign dignitaries, wealthy merchants, and representatives from the royal court. It was the event of the year, and it would be Adrian Blackthorne's funeral. Evelyn woke before dawn, her mind sharp and clear. She'd slept dreamlessly, her body recognizing that today was not a day for doubt or hesitation. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of ice blue silk that seemed to shimmer with captured light. Her jewelry was her grandmother's diamonds, a fortune in gems that caught and reflected every candle flame, making her appear to glow from within. She looked like winter incarnate, beautiful, untouchable, and absolutely merciless. Catherine helped her with the final touches, her hand steady despite the tension crackling through the air. When she finished, she stepped back and whispered, "You look like a queen, my lady." Evelyn studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, or perhaps the person she'd always been beneath 15 years of dutiful suppression. Not a queen, Catherine. A reckoning. Downstairs, the great hall had been transformed. Ice sculptures gleamed in alcoves, their surfaces carved into fantastical shapes. White roses, thousands of them, covered every surface, their petals perfect and cold. The chandeliers had been lowered and fitted with special crystal prisms that fractured the candlelight into dancing stars across the ceiling. Tables groaned under the weight of delicacies from across the realm. It was beautiful enough to break your heart. Adrian stood near the central dais, resplendent in black velvet and silver thread, a wolf mask pushed back on his head. Beside him, Selina wore crimson again, always crimson, always demanding attention, with a fox mask dangling from her fingers. They looked like they owned the world. In 3 hours, they'd own nothing at all. Guests began arriving as the sun set, their carriages crunching through fresh snow, their laughter echoing across the courtyard. They came masked and curious, eager for entertainment, hungry for scandal. The previous week's gossip had primed them perfectly. Everyone wanted to see how the Duke's wife would handle this very public humiliation. They thought they were coming for a spectacle. They had no idea how right they were. Eveline positioned herself near the entrance, greeting guests with flawless courtesy. She noted who arrived, who they spoke with, who avoided her eyes. She watched Lord Pemberton enter with a leather case under his arm, the documents Catherine had delivered, and saw his gaze seek her out across the crowded hall. She inclined her head slightly. He nodded back, understanding passing between them without a word. The musicians began to play. Couples swirled onto the dance floor, their masks glinting in the candlelight, their movements graceful and practiced. Adrian danced first with Selina, holding her close, whispering in her ear, performing their affair like theater. The nobles watched, some amused, some uncomfortable, all unable to look away. Evelyn waited. She danced twice, once with Lord Somerset, once with a foreign ambassador, making polite conversation, her smile never faltering, her eyes constantly tracking the room. At precisely midnight, as tradition dictated, the music stopped, and Adrian stepped onto the central dais to address his guests. He removed his mask with a flourish, his handsome face flushed with wine and satisfaction. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall, "thank you for joining us on this magnificent evening. Ravenspire Castle has stood for 3 centuries as a symbol of strength, vision, and the courage to embrace change." Subtle glances flickered toward Selina. Adrian continued, oblivious or indifferent. "Tonight we celebrate not just the season, but the future. A future built on honesty, on refusing to be trapped by outdated conventions, on having the strength to pursue happiness wherever." He never finished the sentence, because Lord Pemberton stepped onto the dais beside him, the leather case open in his hands, and his voice cut through Adrian's speech like a knife through silk. "Duke Blackthorne, before you continue celebrating your vision for the future, perhaps we should discuss your vision for the kingdom's treasury." The hall went deathly silent. Adrian's smile froze. "I don't know what you—" Pemberton pulled out the first document. "These are receipts for unauthorized trade deals with merchants from Valdoria, a nation currently under royal sanctions. The transactions total over 50,000 gold sovereigns. All of it funneled through your personal accounts." Adrian's face drained of color. "Those are forgeries. Someone is trying to—" Pemberton pulled out another document. "This is a letter from the Merchants Guild detailing how you've been accepting bribes to grant exclusive contracts, undermining the king's economic policies." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Adrian looked wildly around, searching for support, for allies, for someone to step forward and defend him. No one moved. because Evelyn had spent weeks ensuring that every person who might have helped Adrian now had reasons to want him gone. Pemberton wasn't finished. And this, he held up a final document, is evidence that you've been embezzling from the Blackthorn estate itself, stealing from the very lands and people you're sworn to protect. The murmurs became shouts. Nobles pressed forward, trying to see the documents, their faces shocked or triumphant depending on their allegiances. Adrian's composure shattered. He pointed a shaking finger at Pemberton. This is a conspiracy. Someone put you up to this. Someone... His gaze swept the room and landed on Evelyn. She stood perfectly still near the back of the hall, her ice blue gown catching the light, her face serene. Their eyes met. And finally, Adrian understood. You, he breathed. You did this. Evelyn removed her mask slowly, deliberately, and stepped forward through the crowd. People parted for her instinctively, creating a path to the dais. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the vast hall. No, Adrian, you did this. Every corrupt deal, every stolen coin, every moment you believed yourself above consequences. I simply made sure the truth came to light. Adrian's face twisted with rage. You vindictive bit! Marcus appeared at his elbow, along with 2 royal guards. The king's men, your grace. Lord Pemberton sent for them an hour ago. They'll be escorting you for questioning about these allegations. No, this is my castle, my... It was never yours alone, Evelyn said softly. You just acted like it was. The lands, the title, the power. They came through our marriage, through my family's alliances, through years of work you took for granted while you played at being untouchable. Selina, who'd been frozen in shock, suddenly came to life. She rushed toward Adrian, her crimson dress swirling. Adrian, tell them it's not true. Tell them you're innocent. We can fix this together. Evelyn's laugh stopped her mid-sentence. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't triumphant. It was simply tired. Oh, Miss Vale, did you really think he'd protect you? She turned to address the crowd. For those wondering who this woman actually is, her name isn't Selina Vale. It's Selina Ashford, and she's the daughter of Thomas Ashford, who's been trying to break into Blackthorn shipping contracts for 5 years. This entire affair was a scheme to manipulate my husband into granting access to proprietary trade routes. Selina's face went white. That's insane. Your letters to your father are quite detailed, Evelyn continued calmly. Planning how to seduce the Duke, how to isolate his wife, how to gain access to his financial records. Catherine, if you would. Catherine stepped forward with another document. Selina's actual correspondence, obtained through weeks of careful investigation. The crowd erupted. Nobles shouted over each other, some demanding justice, others scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. Adrian looked like a man drowning, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Selina turned to run, but guards blocked the exits. And through it all, Evelyn stood perfectly still at the center of the chaos she'd orchestrated. Lord Pemberton approached her quietly. The king will want a full accounting. This kind of corruption can't... I have everything documented, Evelyn said. Financial records, correspondence, witness testimony. Whatever the crown needs to prosecute this fully, I can provide. Pemberton studied her face for a long moment. You planned this for a long time. 3 years, she confirmed. Since the day I realized he would never change and I stopped hoping he might. Why wait until now? Because revenge isn't about anger, Lord Pemberton. It's about timing. I needed every piece in place, every ally secured, every document verified. I needed him to feel untouchable before I showed him exactly how fragile his power actually was. Pemberton nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across his face. Remind me never to make an enemy of you, Your Grace. Simply treat people with basic decency, my lord. You'll find I'm quite reasonable. The guards began escorting Adrian toward the doors. He twisted back one last time, his face contorted with rage and something that might have been fear. Evelyn, this isn't over. I'll fight this. Evelyn met his gaze one final time. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle, almost pitying. Yes, Adrian, it is over. It's been over for years. You were just too arrogant to notice. And with that, the man who'd humiliated her, who'd paraded his mistress through her home, who'd believed himself invincible, was led away into the snowy night. The great hall remained in chaos for another hour. Some nobles left quickly, wanting to distance themselves from the scandal. Others stayed, desperate to understand what they'd just witnessed, to piece together how the quiet Duchess had orchestrated such a complete demolition. Eveline stood at the center of it all, answering questions with patient courtesy, her composure never cracking. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. And what came next would determine whether she merely survived Adrian's betrayal or whether she transformed it into something greater than either of them had ever been. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the castle grounds in pristine white, erasing footprints, burying secrets. But inside Ravenspire Castle, in the heart of winter, something had shifted irrevocably. The Duke had fallen, and the Duchess had only just begun to rise. But what Evelyn didn't know, what no one in that glittering hall could have suspected, was that across the kingdom, in a stone chamber lit by a single candle, someone else had been watching tonight's events unfold through magical means. And as Adrian Blackthorne was dragged away in chains, this hidden observer smiled and whispered a single word that would change everything. Perfect. The castle fell silent in the way only buildings can after violence has passed through them. Not the comfortable silence of peace, but the hollow quiet of wreckage, of air still vibrating with shock. Evelyn stood alone in the great hall long after the last carriage had crunched away through the snow, after the servants had extinguished most of the candles, after the musicians had packed their instruments with trembling hands and fled into the winter night like refugees from a war zone. She remained perfectly still, her ice blue gown catching the light of the few remaining flames, her face composed in that terrible serenity that had become her armor. Around her, the debris of the evening lay scattered, broken wine glasses, crushed rose petals, the lingering smell of expensive perfume and cheaper fear. The ice sculptures had begun to weep, their surfaces melting into pools on the marble floor, distorting their beautiful shapes into something unrecognizable. Catherine approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. "My lady, you should rest. It's past 3 in the morning." Evelyn didn't turn. Did Marcus ensure the documents were secured in the royal courier's possession? "Yes, my lady. Lord Pemberton took everything personally. He said the king would convene an emergency tribunal within the week. And the household staff? Loyal to the last. Cook wants to know if you'll be taking breakfast in your chambers or the morning room." For the first time since the confrontation, something flickered across Evelyn's face. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something darker, more complicated. The morning room. "I want everyone to see that this house still functions, that it's stronger without him than it ever was with him." Catherine hesitated, then spoke softly. "My lady, what you did tonight, it was extraordinary. You destroyed him completely. You should feel victorious." Evelyn finally turned, and in the dim light her eyes looked ancient, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "Victory, Catherine, is just another word for survival with better lighting. I don't feel victorious. I feel like I've spent 15 years preparing for a battle that lasted less than an hour. And now I have to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. But you're free now. You can—" "Am I?" Evelyn's voice was quiet but sharp. "Adrian will be tried, certainly, stripped of his titles, probably. But I'm still the woman who orchestrated her husband's public destruction. Half the nobility will admire me for it. The other half will be terrified of me. Every interaction for the rest of my life will be colored by what happened in this hall tonight. That's not freedom, Catherine. That's just a different kind of cage." The young maid's eyes filled with tears. "Then what was it all for?" Evelyn moved toward the stairs, her footsteps measured and deliberate. "Because some cages you build yourself, and at least those have better architecture. Come. Tomorrow begins whether we're ready or not." They climbed the grand staircase together, 2 women ascending through shadows and dying candlelight, leaving the wreckage of Adrian's kingdom behind them. What neither of them could see was the figure standing in the darkened gallery above, watching with eyes that missed nothing. The same observer who'd whispered that single, loaded word while Adrian was dragged away. The figure remained motionless until Evelyn disappeared into the east wing, then melted back into the shadows with the ease of someone who'd been navigating this castle's secret passages for far longer than anyone suspected. In the darkness, a piece of parchment was carefully folded and sealed with black wax. The game, as they say, was just beginning. Dawn broke cold and merciless over Ravenspire Castle. Evelyn woke after 4 hours of dreamless sleep, her body moving with mechanical efficiency through the morning routine. Catherine had laid out a dress of deep gray wool, practical, elegant, utterly unlike the dramatic ice blue gown from the night before. The message was clear. The performance was over, now came the governance. When Evelyn entered the morning room precisely at 8, she found Marcus already waiting with the household ledgers spread across the table. The old steward's face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp. "The staff requests a meeting, my lady. They want assurance about their positions now that the Duke is," he searched for a diplomatic word, "indisposed. Assemble them in the servants' hall at noon. I'll speak to them directly." What else? 3 noble houses sent messengers before dawn. Lord Pemberton's office forwarded these. He slid 3 sealed letters across the table. House Montrose withdrawing their trade partnership, House Blackwell demanding immediate repayment of outstanding loans. And this one, he tapped the 3rd letter, from the King's Chancellor. "You're summoned to give testimony at Adrian's tribunal in 5 days." Evelyn broke the seal on the Chancellor's letter, her eyes scanning the formal script. "They want me to detail every piece of evidence, every financial irregularity, every corrupt dealing?" "Which you can do with your eyes closed," Marcus observed. "You've been documenting his crimes for 3 years." "Yes." Evelyn set down the letter carefully. "But testimony means standing in front of the entire royal court and systematically destroying what's left of my husband's reputation. It means making public things that could have remained private. It means becoming the woman who brought down a duke." "You already are that woman, my lady." Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "Last night I was that woman in front of 200 nobles at a private ball. In 5 days I'll be that woman in front of the king, the council, every diplomat and merchant prince in the capital. There's a difference between scandal and history, Marcus. One fades. The other gets written down and studied for generations. Then write your own version. Don't let them turn you into a cautionary tale about vindictive wives. Make them understand what you actually did, protected the crown from a corrupt official who happened to be your husband." Evelyn studied the old steward's weathered face. "When did you become a political strategist?" "I've been managing ducal households for 37 years, my lady. You don't survive that long without understanding how power actually works. The nobles who matter will respect what you did. The ones who don't matter will gossip regardless. The question is, what do you want your legacy to be?" Before Evelyn could respond, Catherine burst through the door, her face flushed with urgency. "My lady, there's someone here. A woman. She arrived without appointment or announcement, and she's refusing to leave until she speaks with you. She says," Catherine swallowed hard, "she says she knows what really happened last night, and you'll want to hear what she has to say before the tribunal." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Marcus. "Did she give a name?" "Lady Margot Thorne." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus stood abruptly, his hand moving instinctively toward the ceremonial sword he no longer wore. "You can't see her, my lady. The Thorns are—" "I know what the Thorns are." Evelyn's voice was steady, but something cold had entered it. "Catherine, how many people are with her?" "She came alone. No guards, no attendants. Just her and a sealed letter she says is addressed to you personally." Evelyn was seeing it for a long moment, her fingers drumming once against the table in a rare display of agitation. Then she stood smoothly. "Show her to the blue parlor. Offer refreshments. I'll be down in 15 minutes. "My lady," Marcus began, but Evelyn cut him off with a look. "The Thorns don't make social calls, Marcus. If Margot is here, it's because something has shifted that we don't yet understand. I need to know what that is before I walk into a royal tribunal." She left the morning room with measured steps, but her mind was racing. Lady Margot Thorne. Even the name carried weight in the political landscape of the kingdom. The Thorne family controlled the eastern provinces, commanded private armies, and had a reputation for ruthlessness that made Adrian's corruption look like amateur hour. They'd been neutral in most court politics for a generation, content to rule their territories with iron efficiency while the capital nobles played their games. If Margot was here now, the morning after Adrian's fall, it meant one of 2 things: opportunity or threat, possibly both. Evelyn changed into a different dress, dark blue velvet with silver fastenings, Formal enough to signal importance, but practical enough to move in if necessary. She pinned her hair more severely, added her grandmother's sapphire brooch, checked her reflection once. The woman staring back looked like someone who could weather whatever storm was about to break. She hoped that was true. The blue parlor was the smallest of the castle's formal receiving rooms, chosen deliberately. Its intimate size made secrets feel possible, made grand posturing difficult. Lady Margot Thorne sat in the chair nearest the window, her posture perfect, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She was perhaps 50 years old, silver-haired and sharp-featured, dressed in traveling clothes of exceptional quality. Her eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, tracked Eveline's entrance with the focus of a predator assessing prey. "Your Grace." Her voice was cultured, neutral, revealing nothing. "Lady Margot." Eveline closed the door quietly behind her and remained standing. "Catherine mentioned you have information about last night's events." Margot smiled thinly. "I have information about many things, Your Grace, last night's theatrical performance included. May I say, it was expertly executed. The timing, the documentation, the public venue, masterfully done. You destroyed your husband so thoroughly that resurrection would be easier than rehabilitation." Eveline moved to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking if Margot wanted one. "Is that what you came to tell me? That I did a good job humiliating my husband? I came to tell you that you've created a vacuum." Margot accepted the wine glass but didn't drink. Adrian Blackthorne was corrupt, reckless, and stupid, but he held power in this kingdom. Power over trade routes, shipping contracts, political alliances. You just removed him from the board. That power doesn't disappear, Your Grace. It transfers. The question is, to whom? Eveline sat down across from her, finally allowing herself to relax fractionally into the chair. "I assume you're about to suggest it should transfer to you. Not to me. To you, with my family's support." The words hung in the air between them like a blade balanced on its point. Eveline studied Margot's face, searching for the trap. "Why would the Thorns help me?" "Because you just demonstrated that you're the most dangerous woman in this kingdom, and my family has always believed in aligning with competence rather than fighting it." Margot leaned forward slightly. "You think last night was the end of something. It wasn't. Adrian's trial will expose corruption that reaches far beyond one stupid duke. When those connections come to light, half the noble houses in this kingdom will panic. Some will try to distance themselves. Others will try to seize the chaos as opportunity. There will be a power struggle, Your Grace, a significant one. And you're sitting at the center of it without allies. I have allies? You have household staff and a few nobles who respected your dignity. That's not the same as political infrastructure." Margot's voice sharpened. "Adrian had enemies, certainly, but he also had partners, people who profited from his schemes and won't appreciate you exposing them. They'll come for you, not with soldiers, but with lawyers, investigators, rumors. They'll paint you as an ambitious woman who destroyed her husband for power. They'll dig into your finances, your correspondence, looking for anything to discredit you before the tribunal. Let them try. My records are spotless." "Are they?" Margot pulled a folded letter from her jacket and placed it on the table between them. "This was delivered to my estate 2 days ago. It alleges that you've been embezzling from the Blackthorne accounts for years, funneling money into private investments, and that your accusation against Adrian is actually a preemptive strike to cover your own crimes." Eveline's hand froze halfway to the letter. "That's insane. Every transaction I've made is documented and legitimate. I know that. I had my people verify the claims before I came here. They're complete fabrications. But fabrications backed by forged documents that look extremely convincing." Margot's pale eyes held Eveline's. "Someone is building a case against you, Your Grace. Someone with resources, skill, and motivation. And they're moving fast, which means they knew Adrian's fall was coming and had this ready to deploy." The wine glass in Eveline's hand felt suddenly heavy. "Who sent this to you?" "Anonymous. But the seal was distinctive. 3 ravens in flight. That's not a Blackthorne symbol." "No." Eveline's voice had gone very quiet. "It's not. Because the 3 raven symbol belonged to House Corvain, a family that had been extinct for 20 years after the last patriarch died in a suspicious writing accident. Extinct families didn't send letters. which meant someone was using a dead house's heraldry as a cover. Someone who wanted to destroy Evelyn's credibility without revealing their own identity. Someone who'd been watching, planning, waiting for exactly this moment. Margot watched the realization move across Evelyn's face. Now, do you understand why you need allies? Whoever this is, they're not playing the same game you were with Adrian. This isn't about humiliation or justice. This is about removing you from the board entirely. Evelyn set down her wine glass with deliberate care. What do the Thorns want in exchange for their support? 3 things. Margot ticked them off with business-like efficiency. First, the shipping contracts Adrian controlled transfer to joint Blackthorn-Thorn management. We provide the infrastructure, you provide legitimacy. Second, when the power vacuum in the eastern trade routes resolves, the Thorns get priority consideration. Third, she paused, you publicly align yourself with House Thorn at the tribunal. Sit with our family, accept our counsel, show the court that you have backing. Evelyn laughed, sharp and humorless. You want me to trade Adrian's control for yours? We want mutual benefit. Margot's voice hardened. Adrian used his power like a blunt instrument. We use ours like a scalpel. You want to survive what's coming? You need people who understand how to fight dirty and have the resources to match. The Thorns can provide both. And if I refuse, then you walk into that tribunal alone, and whoever is manufacturing evidence against you will have a much easier time convincing the court that you're just another corrupt noble scrambling for power. Margot stood smoothly. I'm not threatening you, Your Grace. I'm offering you a choice. Accept our partnership or reject it. But make the decision quickly, because your enemies aren't waiting. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. One more thing. The woman who was with Adrian, Selena Ashford. She disappeared from royal custody last night. The guards claim she simply walked out during the chaos. No one seems to know where she went. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. That's impossible. She was under guard. Yes. Curious, isn't it? Margot's smile was razor thin, almost as if someone with influence wanted her free. Someone who might find her useful. Think about that, Your Grace. Think about what it means that your husband's co-conspirator vanished the same night you exposed him. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Evelyn sat motionless in the quiet parlor, her mind working through implications like a chess master analyzing a board. Selena gone. Forged evidence already circulating. Anonymous letters with dead house seals. Someone had been planning this parallel to her own scheme, possibly for just as long. Someone who understood that Adrian's fall would create opportunity and had prepared to exploit it. But who? She stood abruptly and moved to her writing desk, pulling out the private journal she'd kept for 3 years. The one with names, dates, connections. She documented Adrian's network extensively, but now she needed to look at it differently. Not who Adrian had hurt, but who might have been using him, who profited from his corruption staying hidden just long enough to prepare their own plays. The list was longer than she wanted to admit. Marcus entered without knocking, his face grim. My lady, we have another situation. The staff meeting. It's not just about their positions. They're demanding hazard pay. Evelyn looked up sharply. Hazard pay? Cook's son was approached this morning by men offering gold in exchange for information about your daily routines. Where you take meals, when you walk the gardens, who you meet with privately. Marcus's jaw was tight with anger. Someone is already trying to get eyes inside this castle. Evelyn closed the journal slowly. Offer the staff double wages and private guard escorts for anyone who feels threatened. Make it clear that loyalty will be rewarded and betrayal will be prosecuted. And Marcus, she met his eyes, hire additional guards. Not Adrian's men, new ones. Veterans with no local loyalties. I want this castle locked down. You think someone will try? I think someone is playing a game I'm still trying to understand. Until I do, we assume everyone is a threat and nothing is coincidence. She returned to the journal, her pen moving quickly across fresh pages, building a new map. Not of Adrian's crimes, but of the power structure those crimes had concealed. Because Margot was right about one thing. Power didn't disappear when you removed a player. It just flowed somewhere else, following channels you couldn't always see until it was too late. Evelyn had spent 3 years preparing to destroy Adrian Blackthorn. Now she had 5 days to figure out who was trying to destroy her, and why. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Evelyn moved through the castle like a general organizing defense, meeting with lawyers, reviewing documents, fortifying her position for the coming tribunal. She slept in 3-hour increments, ate standing up, drove her household staff and advisors with relentless precision. But beneath the activity, fear moved like a current, because every day brought new evidence of the campaign against her. A merchant who'd sworn testimony supporting her case suddenly recanted, claiming he'd been coerced. Documents she'd secured in the royal archive were requested for review by officials whose names she didn't recognize. Rumors began circulating in the capital that the Duchess had been embezzling for years, that Adrian's crimes were actually hers, that she'd manipulated everything to frame an innocent man. The lies were sophisticated, coordinated, backed by just enough false evidence to make people question what they thought they knew. On the third day, Lord Pemberton visited personally. He arrived without fanfare, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like sympathy. "Your Grace, we need to talk about the tribunal." They met in Evelyn's private study, the door locked, guards posted outside. Pemberton sat heavily in the chair across from her desk and rubbed his eyes. "The King's Council is receiving pressure to postpone your testimony. Several houses are claiming bias, suggesting you're an unreliable witness given your personal involvement." Evelyn's hands clenched beneath the desk. "On what grounds?" "They're arguing that a wife scorned can't be trusted to give objective testimony against her husband, that your evidence might be tainted by personal vendetta. It's nonsense, of course, but it's gaining traction. Who's leading the opposition? That's the problem." Pemberton pulled out a list. 7 different houses, none of whom had obvious connections to Adrian. They're presenting it as a coalition concerned with judicial integrity, but he hesitated. "Your Grace, these families don't usually coordinate. Someone is organizing them. Someone with significant reach and resources." Evelyn studied the list of names, her mind cataloging connections, searching for patterns. Half these houses have daughters unmarried. 3 have sons seeking military commissions. 2 are facing financial difficulties. Someone is leveraging favors and promises to build this coalition. That's my assessment as well. Pemberton leaned forward. "Your Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Is there any truth to the embezzlement allegations?" "None. Every transaction I've made is documented and legal. I can provide proof." "Then provide it. Now. Because if these accusations gain any more credibility, the tribunal could pivot from prosecuting Adrian to investigating you. And if that happens, I'll be destroyed regardless of evidence." Evelyn finished the thought. "Because the goal isn't truth, it's creating enough doubt to paralyze the proceedings." "Exactly." Pemberton stood, his expression troubled. "You need to understand what you're facing. Adrian was corrupt, but he was also predictable. Whoever is behind this is neither. They're playing a longer game, and I don't think we've seen their end game yet." After he left, Evelyn sat alone in the gathering darkness, listening to the castle settle around her. Outside her window, snow began falling again, soft and inexorable, covering the grounds in another layer of white, erasing tracks, burying evidence. She thought about Margot's offer, the Thorns' support in exchange for alliance. It went against everything Evelyn had worked for. She'd wanted independence, not another partnership that could become another cage. But independence meant nothing if she was destroyed before she could exercise it. The knock on her door came precisely at midnight. Catherine entered, her face pale. "My lady, there's someone here. He came through the servant's entrance. He says he has information about who's organizing against you." Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to the letter opener on her desk. Ridiculous as a weapon, but better than nothing. "Who is he?" "He wouldn't give his name, but he's carrying this." Catherine held out a small wooden token carved with 3 ravens in flight, the same symbol from the forged documents. Every instinct screamed trap, but curiosity and desperation won out. "Bring him up. Keep guards outside the door. If anything happens, they come in immediately." Catherine nodded and disappeared. Moments later, a man entered the study. He was perhaps 35, tall and lean, dressed in dark clothes that suggested money but not nobility. His face was unremarkable, the kind that disappeared in crowds, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, missing nothing as they swept the room. "Your Grace." His voice was cultured, neutral. "Thank you for seeing me." I haven't decided yet if that was wise. Who are you? Someone who knows who's trying to destroy you. He moved to the chair across from her desk without invitation and sat. Someone who can help you survive the tribunal. For a price. Evelyn remained standing, maintaining the power position. Why would you help me? Because my employer has no particular loyalty to the people working against you, and because the information I have is more valuable sold to you than used against you. He smiled thinly. I'm a pragmatist, Your Grace, not a loyalist. Your employer being. That remains confidential. What I can tell you is this. The coalition against you is being funded by someone outside the traditional noble houses. Someone with foreign connections and commercial interests that extend beyond this kingdom's borders. They don't want you dead, Your Grace. They want you discredited and removed from any position of influence. Why? Because Adrian Blackthorne's corruption was useful to them. His greed made him easy to manipulate. His incompetence made him easy to control. You, on the other hand, the stranger's eyes held hers. You're intelligent, careful, and you've just demonstrated a capacity for long-term strategic planning that makes you extremely dangerous to people who profit from chaos. Evelyn felt ice crystallize in her chest. What people? Merchants, smugglers, foreign powers. Adrian thought he was running his own schemes, but he was actually a tool. And the people using him don't appreciate you removing their asset, so they're replacing him with someone they can control more easily. Who? That's the expensive part of this information. The stranger leaned back. I can give you names, documentation, proof of the conspiracy. Enough to expose them at the tribunal and shift the investigation away from you entirely. But it will cost you. How much? Not money. Access. Specifically access to the Blackthorne trade routes and shipping contracts after this resolves. My employer wants a seat at the table when the dust settles. Evelyn studied his face, searching for tells, for signs of deception. Everyone wants a piece of Adrian's empire. What makes your employer different? Timing. We're offering help before the tribunal, not promises after. And we're not asking for control, just access. A partnership where everyone profits. He pulled a sealed letter from his jacket. This contains enough information to verify what I'm telling you. Names of 2 coalition members who are being blackmailed into opposition. Read it. Check the facts. Then decide if you want the rest. He stood smoothly and placed the letter on her desk. You have 24 hours, Your Grace. After that, this information becomes useless to you and I'll sell it elsewhere. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The woman, Selena Ashford. She's not missing. She's being protected by the same people funding the coalition against you. They're planning to use her at the tribunal, put her on the stand to testify that you coerced false testimony from her, that Adrian's crimes were fabricated by a vengeful wife. Evelyn's blood froze. That's insane. The evidence is documented. Evidence can be contested. Witnesses can recant. Reasonable doubt can be manufactured. The stranger's voice was almost sympathetic. You think you destroyed your husband with truth. You did. But truth is just another weapon, Your Grace, and your enemies know how to use it better than you do. He left without waiting for a response. Evelyn stood motionless for a long moment, then picked up the sealed letter. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax, not with fear, but with the terrible understanding that she'd been fighting the wrong battle. She'd prepared to destroy Adrian. She hadn't prepared for what came after. Inside the letter were 2 names, Lord Ashford, Selena's father, currently under investigation for illegal weapons trading but suddenly finding his charges dismissed, and Lady Cresswell, whose family faced bankruptcy until a mysterious loan appeared 3 days after Adrian's arrest. Both were part of the coalition against Evelyn. Both had been bought. Evelyn moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds. Somewhere out there, multiple parties were maneuvering for position. The Thorns offering alliance, this mysterious employer offering information, the coalition trying to destroy her credibility. And behind it all, the foreign interests who'd been using Adrian and now wanted to replace him with someone more controllable. She'd thought destroying her husband would free her. Instead, it had painted a target on her back the size of the kingdom. The tribunal was in 2 days. Evelyn had 48 hours to decide, accept help from people she didn't trust, or face her enemies alone with truth as her only weapon. Truth that was already being twisted into lies. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and allowed herself exactly 10 seconds of despair. 10 seconds to acknowledge the exhaustion, the fear, the crushing weight of being alone in a castle that suddenly felt more like a fortress under siege than a home. Then she straightened, smoothed her dress, and returned to her desk. Because giving up wasn't an option. It never had been. The night before the tribunal, Evelyn made her decisions. She sent word to Lady Margot accepting the Thorn Alliance under modified terms, partnership, not control, with escape clauses written into every agreement. She sent a message to the mysterious stranger accepting his information exchange, but through intermediaries and with payment held in escrow until she could verify authenticity. And she sent letters to every house that had supported her privately, reminding them of debts owed and favors rendered, calling in 15 years of careful relationship building. Then she did something unexpected. She invited Selina Ashford to tea. The message was delivered through channels she knew the coalition would be monitoring. It was brief, almost casual. I believe we should speak before tomorrow's tribunal, the Rose Chamber, noon, come alone. She had no idea if Selina would accept, but she understood human nature well enough to know that curiosity and arrogance were powerful motivators. And Selina had always been curious. The Rose Chamber, the same room Adrian had given his mistress, the room across from Evelyn's own quarters, had been stripped and cleaned in the days since Adrian's arrest. No trace of Selina's brief occupation remained. It looked exactly as it had before, elegant, impersonal, cold. Evelyn waited by the window, dressed in charcoal gray, her jewelry minimal. She looked like someone attending a funeral, which felt appropriate. Selina arrived precisely at noon, escorted by 2 men in unmarked clothing who waited outside the door. She wore green velvet, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, her face carefully composed. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted around the room, checking corners, assessing escape routes. She was afraid. Good. Your Grace. Selina's voice was cautious. I was surprised to receive your invitation. Were you? Evelyn gestured to the chair opposite hers. I thought you'd appreciate the opportunity to speak without lawyers and tribunals between us. Selina sat slowly, her posture defensive. What do we have to speak about? Truth. Evelyn poured tea with steady hands. You're planning to testify against me tomorrow, to claim I coerced you, fabricated evidence, destroyed an innocent man out of jealousy. Selina's face remained blank. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult us both with lies. I know you're being protected by the coalition. I know they've promised to clear your name and your father's charges in exchange for your testimony. I know everything, Selina. The question is, do you know what you're actually involved in? I don't. Adrian wasn't working alone. Evelyn's voice cut through Selina's protest. His corruption was useful to people far more powerful than him. People who've now transferred their attention to removing me because I'm less controllable than he was. You think you're being rescued. You're actually being used again. And when those people are done with you, you'll be disposed of just like Adrian. Selina's composure cracked slightly. You're lying. They said you'd try to manipulate me. Did they tell you why they need you to testify? Why my evidence isn't enough for them? Because it is enough. The documentation is airtight. Adrian's crimes are undeniable. So why do they need to discredit me? She leaned forward. Because this isn't about Adrian anymore. It's about controlling the power vacuum his fall created. And you're standing in the middle of it without understanding the game being played. Selina stood abruptly, her hands shaking. You can't. Sit down. Evelyn's voice was quiet but commanded instant obedience. Selina sat. I'm not asking you to help me. I'm offering you a choice. Testify tomorrow like you planned, help them destroy my credibility, and maybe they'll honor their promises. Or walk away. Disappear. Take what money you've saved and go somewhere these people can't reach you. And if I testify, then you'll discover that promises from people like that are worth exactly as much as your usefulness. And the moment you're no longer useful. She left the sentence unfinished. Selina's face had gone pale. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of being underestimated, and I'm done playing games where the rules keep changing. Evelyn stood and moved to the window. You were a pawn in Adrian's schemes. Don't be a pawn in someone else's. That's all I came to say. She didn't watch Selina leave, but she heard the younger woman's footsteps pause at the door, heard the sharp intake of breath that suggested tears or fury or both. Then the door closed, and Evelyn was alone. She had no idea if the gambit would work. Selina might run straight back to her handlers and report everything. She might show up at the tribunal tomorrow and testify exactly as planned. But Evelyn had planted doubt, and doubt was a powerful weapon. Sometimes the best strategy wasn't controlling the board. It was making your opponents question who was really controlling them. The morning of the tribunal arrived with crystalline clarity. No snow, no clouds, just brutal winter sunshine that made everything look sharp and unforgiving. Evelyn dressed in midnight blue velvet embroidered with silver thread, formal enough for royal court, severe enough to signal seriousness. Her grandmother's diamonds again, catching light with each movement. She looked like power. She felt like someone walking to their execution. The tribunal was being held in the grand chamber of the royal palace, a vast room with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with the portraits of dead kings. Rows of seats faced a raised platform where the king's justices would preside. Every noble house of significance had sent representatives. The foreign ambassadors occupied a special gallery. Scribes sat ready to record every word for the historical record. It was, without question, the most important moment of Evelyn's life. Marcus met her at the entrance, his face grim. "The Thorns are already seated. Lady Margot saved you a place in their section. And your grace?" He lowered his voice. "Selina Ashford hasn't been seen since yesterday afternoon. Her handlers are searching for her." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something loosened in her chest. "Interesting. The coalition is furious. Without her testimony, half their case collapses. They're scrambling to delay proceedings." "Good. Let them scramble." She entered the grand chamber with her spine straight and her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her progress. She took her seat next to Lady Margot, who nodded once in greeting but said nothing. The Thorns had come in force, 8 family members occupying the row, their presence a wall of solidarity that made other nobles reassess their positions. The justices entered. 7 of them, in crimson robes, their faces professionally neutral. The lead justice, Lord Chancellor Whitmore, took a seat at the center of the raised platform. "This tribunal is convened to investigate allegations of corruption, embezzlement, and treason against Duke Adrian Blackthorne." His voice carried effortlessly through the chamber. "We will hear testimony from multiple witnesses and review documented evidence. Lady Evelyn Ashcombe, Duchess of Blackthorne, please rise." Evelyn stood. Whitmore's eyes held hers. "You've provided substantial documentation regarding your husband's criminal activities. The court has reviewed these materials and finds them compelling. However," he paused, "serious questions have been raised about your own conduct, questions that must be addressed before we can proceed." From the opposite side of the chamber, Lord Ashford stood. His face was red with barely suppressed rage. "My lords, I move that the Duchess be investigated for conspiracy and fraud. She has manufactured evidence, coerced witnesses, and orchestrated this entire proceeding to seize control of the Blackthorne estate illegally." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Whitmore raised his hand for silence. "That's a serious allegation, Lord Ashford. What evidence do you present?" Ashford's lawyer approached with a stack of documents. "We have financial records showing irregular transfers, witness statements claiming coercion, and," he faltered slightly, "we had arranged for testimony from Miss Selina Ashford regarding the Duchess's manipulation." "Had arranged?" Whitmore's voice sharpened. "Where is Miss Ashford now?" Ashford's face darkened. We're uncertain of her current location." "You're bringing allegations based on a missing witness and documents you haven't provided the court time to verify?" Whitmore's displeasure was obvious. "That's irregular, Lord Ashford." "My lords," Lady Margot stood smoothly. "If I may address the court, the Thorne family has conducted our own investigation into these matters. We have documentation proving that the financial records Lord Ashford presents are forgeries, created within the past week by a group with foreign backing attempting to destabilize this proceeding." She produced her own documents, the information Evelyn had purchased from the mysterious stranger, verified and expanded through Thorne resources. The evidence was devastating, proof of the coalition's coordination, the foreign interests funding them, the falsified documents created to frame Evelyn. Lord Ashford's face went from red to white. You can't what? Present evidence?" Margot's voice was ice. Expose conspiracy? The Thorns have every legal right to submit documentation to this tribunal, unless you'd like to argue we should suppress evidence. The chamber erupted. Nobles shouted over each other. Ashford's coalition scrambled to respond. The justices demanded order. And through it all, Evelyn remained standing, silent, watching her enemy's case collapse in real time. Whitmore's gavel finally restored quiet. This tribunal will recess for 1 hour while we review Lady Thorne's submissions. All parties will remain available for questioning, and Lord Ashford, his voice was cold, you will explain to this court how you came into possession of falsified documents or face charges of your own. The justices withdrew. The chamber dissolved into chaos. Margot leaned close to Evelyn. Breathe, Your Grace. You're not out of this yet, but we've shifted the battlefield. Evelyn's hands were shaking. She folded them in her lap to hide it. Will Ashford break? He'll try to take his co-conspirators with him. Margot's smile was thin. Men like that always do. The question is whether the justices will pursue the foreign connections or choose diplomatic silence. And if they choose silence, then you've exposed enough to protect yourself, but the people really pulling strings stay in shadows. Margot's pale eyes held hers. Sometimes winning means surviving, not destroying your enemies completely. You need to decide if that's enough for you. The hour-long recess stretched into 3. Evelyn waited in a private chamber, guarded by Thorn soldiers, while lawyers and justices negotiated behind closed doors. Marcus brought her water she couldn't drink and food she couldn't eat. Catherine sat in the corner, her hands twisting in her lap, radiating anxiety. Then the summons came. The tribunal had reached a decision. Evelyn returned to the grand chamber feeling hollowed out, exhausted beyond exhaustion. The nobles had returned as well, sensing blood in the water, hungry to see how this resolved. Lord Chancellor Whitmore looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 hours. This tribunal has reviewed all evidence presented. His voice was heavy. After careful deliberation, we find the allegations against Duchess Evelyn Ashcombe to be without merit. The financial irregularities cited have been proven false. The claims of coercion remain unsubstantiated without witness testimony. The Duchess's evidence against Duke Adrian Blackthorne stands validated. Evelyn's knees nearly buckled with relief. However, Whitmore's tone sharpened. The evidence of broader conspiracy presented by House Thorne raises questions this tribunal is not equipped to address. Those matters will be referred to the King's Privy Council for further investigation. As for Duke Adrian Blackthorne, he looked directly at where Adrian sat, flanked by guards. You are hereby stripped of all titles, properties, and privileges. Your assets are forfeit to the crown. You will be imprisoned pending sentencing for corruption, embezzlement, and treason. Adrian's face contorted with rage and disbelief. You can't. This is... She did this. He pointed at Evelyn with a shaking hand. She destroyed me. You destroyed yourself. Whitmore's voice cut through Adrian's breakdown. You betrayed your oath, your king, and your duty. This court finds you guilty. Take him away. Guards dragged Adrian from the chamber as he screamed incoherently, his composure finally, completely shattered. Evelyn watched him go and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the empty recognition that this wasn't victory. It was just survival. The justices dismissed the tribunal. Nobles flooded toward Evelyn and the Thorns, some offering congratulations, others calculating new alliances. Evelyn accepted them all with mechanical courtesy, her face a mask, her mind elsewhere. She'd won, but the cost was every assumption she'd had about what winning meant. A sight. 3 hours later, Evelyn stood alone in her private study at Ravenspire Castle, watching the sun set over snow-covered grounds. The castle was quiet again. The frantic energy of recent days dissipated into exhausted calm. Marcus had retired with strict instructions not to be disturbed unless the castle was on fire. Catherine was sleeping after crying with relief for 20 minutes straight. The Thorne delegation had departed with promises of future meetings and contract negotiations. Evelyn had exactly what she'd fought for: independence, safety, control of her own destiny. So why did she feel like she'd lost something crucial? The knock on her door was soft but deliberate. Come in. Lady Margot entered, still in her travel clothes, and closed the door behind her. I'm leaving in the morning. I wanted to speak with you privately before I go. Evelyn didn't turn from the window. To tell me what I owe you? to ask if you understand what you've gotten yourself into. Margot moved to stand beside her, both women gazing out at the twilit landscape. You won today, Your Grace. You exposed Adrian, protected yourself, even damaged the coalition working against you. But you didn't destroy them. They're still out there, still organized, still motivated to remove you from power. I know. And now you're allied with my family, which means their enemies become yours. The Thorns have been neutral in most conflicts because we prefer to avoid entanglements. That changes with this partnership. You'll be drawn into disputes you didn't start, forced to take sides in conflicts you don't care about. Is that really the freedom you wanted? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to stop being powerless. I wanted to stop watching my life be controlled by a man who saw me as property. I got that. Everything else, she gestured vaguely, is just the price of standing up. High price. Better than the alternative. Margot studied her profile. You're stronger than I expected, Your Grace. Most people would have broken under this pressure. You adapted. That's rare. I adapted because the alternative was destruction. That's not strength, Lady Margot. That's just stubbornness dressed up prettily. Perhaps, but stubbornness wins more battles than brilliance. Margot moved toward the door, then paused. One final thing. The information you bought from that stranger, the names, the connections. My people traced the seller. He works for a consortium of foreign merchants who want to expand into our markets. By helping you, they've bought access to the Blackthorn trade routes, and a debt you'll eventually have to repay. Evelyn closed her eyes. Everyone wants something. Everyone always does. The question is whether you're willing to pay their price when they come collecting. Margot opened the door. Sleep well, Your Grace. Tomorrow the real work begins. She left, and Evelyn was finally, truly alone. She stood at that window until full dark, watching stars emerge in the winter sky, thinking about the past weeks, the past years, the past 15 years of a marriage that had been dying since its inception. She thought about Adrian, broken and imprisoned, still believing somehow that he'd been the victim. She thought about Selena, disappeared into whatever future she'd chosen. She thought about all the people she'd allied with, manipulated, used to achieve survival, and she thought about what came next. Because the tribunal was over, but the war wasn't. Adrian was gone, but the forces that had used him remained. Evelyn had won her independence, but she'd traded one kind of cage for another, one built from alliances and debts and compromises. And somewhere out there in the darkness, enemies she hadn't yet identified were watching, waiting for her next mistake. The castle was quiet. The snow kept falling, and Evelyn, Duchess of Blackthorn, survivor of betrayal, architect of her husband's destruction, stood alone in her study and faced the terrible truth. She couldn't go back to who she'd been before. She couldn't move forward without becoming someone she'd never wanted to be. And the only path left was straight through the fire, where every choice would cost something she wasn't sure she could afford to lose. The real question wasn't whether she'd survive what came next. It was whether she'd recognize herself when it was over. The first sign that something had shifted came 3 weeks after the tribunal, on a morning so cold the windows of Ravenspire Castle had frosted over with patterns that looked like skeletal hands reaching across the glass. Evelyn woke from a dreamless sleep to find Marcus standing in her bedchamber doorway, his weathered face gray with something that looked like shock. She sat up immediately, her mind snapping to alertness. What happened? Marcus closed the door behind him with deliberate care, the kind of movement that suggested he was trying to contain catastrophe within a small space. My lady, the Thorn contracts, all of them, they've been voided. Evelyn threw back the covers and reached for her robe, her hand steady despite the ice flooding her veins. Voided by whom? By Lady Margot herself. She sent official notice this morning through a royal courier. The partnership is dissolved, effective immediately. No explanation, no negotiation. Just, he held out the document with shaking hands. Termination. Evelyn took the parchment and read it twice, searching for hidden clauses or loopholes. The language was brutally clear. House Thorn hereby withdraws from all agreements with House Blackthorn. All shared contracts revert to Thorn control. All financial arrangements are nullified. The signature at the bottom was Margot's, witnessed by 3 Thorn family members and sealed with their house crest in black wax. It was a death sentence dressed in legal language. Without the Thorn partnership, Evelyn lost access to trade routes, shipping infrastructure, political protection. She'd spent 3 weeks rebuilding her position based on that alliance. Every negotiation, every new contract, every promise she'd made to merchants and nobles, all of it had been leveraged against Thorn backing. That backing had just evaporated like morning fog. When? Her voice was steady, clinical. When was this signed? 2 days ago. Marcus's jaw was tight, which means Margot has been planning this withdrawal since before she left the castle. Everything she said about partnership and mutual benefit, it was theater, my lady. She used the tribunal to position herself, then cut us loose once she had what she needed. Evelyn moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds without really seeing them. Her mind was racing through implications like a chess master analyzing a suddenly overturned board. What else? Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. There's more? Lord Pemberton sent word. The Privy Council has reopened the investigation into your conduct during Adrian's exposure. They're claiming new evidence has emerged suggesting you may have falsified some of the documents used at the tribunal. That's impossible. Every document was verified. I know, my lady. But someone is claiming otherwise, and without Thorn's support to counter the accusations, the council is listening. Eveline's reflection in the frosted window looked like a ghost. Who filed the new claims? Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Lord Ashford. And 6 other houses from the coalition, the same coalition we thought had been damaged by the tribunal. They've regrouped, my lady, and they're coming for you again. Eveline closed her eyes and allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of pure, unadulterated rage. 5 seconds to feel the injustice of it, that she'd fought so hard, risked everything, won at the tribunal, and still couldn't escape the machinery working to destroy her. Then she opened her eyes and the rage crystallized into something colder, sharper. Call Catherine. I need to dress. Then assemble the household staff in the main hall. If we're under siege, everyone needs to understand what's at stake. My lady, perhaps you should consider— What, Marcus? Evelyn turned to face him. Running, hiding, capitulating? I've spent my entire adult life being underestimated and cornered. I'm done accepting that as my fate. If they want to destroy me, they'll have to work for it. But without allies, then I'll make new ones. Or I'll fight alone. She moved past him toward her dressing room. Either way, I'm not surrendering. Marcus nodded slowly, something like pride flickering across his exhausted face. As you say, my lady, I'll gather the staff. After he left, Evelyn stood alone in her chambers and felt the weight of isolation settle over her like a shroud. The Thorns had betrayed her. The coalition had regrouped. Even Lord Pemberton, who'd seemed sympathetic at the tribunal, was now allowing the investigation to reopen. She'd won the battle and lost the war before she even realized the war had expanded. The question gnawing at her wasn't why they were attacking again. That was obvious. She'd exposed too much, threatened too many comfortable arrangements. The question was how they'd coordinated so quickly and completely. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone with reach, resources, and a deep understanding of political leverage. Someone who'd been planning this destruction for far longer than 3 weeks. Eveline dressed in charcoal gray wool, severe and practical with minimal jewelry. She looked like someone prepared for battle, not court. Then she descended to the main hall where her household staff had gathered. 32 people who'd served the Blackthorn estate for years, some for decades. Their faces showed confusion, worry, and in a few cases barely concealed fear. She stood on the raised platform where Adrian had once given orders, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Thank you for gathering quickly. Her voice carried through the hall without effort. I won't waste your time with pleasantries. You've all heard rumors about the Thorn withdrawal and the reopened investigation. I'm here to tell you those rumors are true. House Blackthorn is under attack and the coming weeks will be difficult. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I'm giving each of you a choice. You can stay and face whatever comes with me, or you can leave now with 3 months' wages and references for new positions. No judgment, no recriminations. But if you stay, you need to understand what that means. We'll be watched, possibly searched. Anyone associated with this house will face scrutiny and pressure. So decide carefully. She paused, letting the weight of the decision settle. Cook was the first to speak, her weathered face set in stubborn lines. My family has served House Blackthorn for 4 generations, Your Grace. I'm not leaving because some nobles are playing politics. Several others nodded agreement. The stablemaster stepped forward. Where else would we go? You've treated us fairly when the Duke never did. That means something. One by one, the staff voiced their support. Not all of them. 3 chamberlains and the assistant gardener quietly excused themselves, which Evelyn noted without comment. But the majority stayed, their loyalty holding firm even as the foundation cracked beneath them. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. All of you. I can't promise this will end well, but I can promise I'll fight for this house and everyone in it. After dismissing them, she retreated to her study where Marcus was already waiting with more reports. His expression had gone from shocked to grimly determined. The financial accounts have been frozen, my lady. Royal order pending the investigation. We have enough reserves to operate for perhaps 6 weeks if we're careful. 6 weeks. Evelyn sat heavily in her chair. What about the shipping contracts not tied to Thorn being challenged? Merchants are claiming breach of terms since the promised Thorn infrastructure isn't available. Half of them are demanding refunds or threatening legal action. So we're isolated, under investigation, and facing financial collapse. Evelyn's laugh was hollow. Is there any good news? Marcus hesitated. There's a letter. It arrived by private courier an hour ago. No seal, no signature, but he placed it on her desk. I think you'll want to read it. Eveline broke the plain wax seal and unfolded the single sheet of parchment. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, unfamiliar. The message was brief. Your Grace, you've been betrayed by someone closer than you realize. The Thorn withdrawal wasn't business, it was payment. Meet me tonight at the old mill beyond the eastern woods. Come alone. I have information that will save your life, but only if you're willing to accept how completely you've been deceived. A friend you don't know you have. Evelyn read it 3 times, searching for hidden meanings or obvious traps. This could be anything. An ambush, a kidnapping attempt, a scheme to get me away from the castle's protection. Could be, Marcus agreed. Or it could be legitimate. You're running out of options, my lady. And whoever wrote this knows details about the Thorn situation that shouldn't be public yet. Evelyn studied the handwriting again. Something about it nagged at her, not familiarity exactly, but a sense of precision that suggested education and careful thought. If I don't go, I might miss the only chance to understand what's really happening. If you do go, you might not come back. Then you'll have to run this estate without me. She stood and moved to the weapons cabinet, selecting a small dagger that fit easily in a concealed sheath at her waist. But I'm not dying tonight, Marcus. Not without answers. Take guards. No. If this person wanted me dead, there are easier ways than a cryptic letter. Whoever this is, they want to talk. And I need to hear what they have to say. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue further, but recognized the futility. At least take a horse you can trust. And if you're not back by dawn, I'm sending every guard we have to find you. Fair enough. Evelyn checked the dagger's blade, sharp and well-balanced. Though if I'm not back by dawn, finding me probably won't matter anymore. The old mill sat on the edge of the Blackthorn estate, abandoned for 20 years after a fire had gutted the interior and killed the miller's family. Local superstition claimed it was cursed. More practically, it was isolated, surrounded by dense woods, and far enough from the castle that screams wouldn't carry. Perfect place for murder or revelation, depending on perspective. Evelyn rode through the winter darkness with only a single lantern, her breath misting in the freezing air. The forest closed around her like a fist, bare branches scraping against the sky, snow crunching beneath her horse's hooves. Every shadow could hide an ambush, every sound could signal danger, but she kept riding, because fear was just another cage and she'd promised herself no more cages. The mill emerged from the darkness like a rotten tooth, collapsed roof, broken windows, walls blackened by ancient fire. A single light flickered inside, visible through the shattered doorway. Evelyn dismounted and tied her horse to a tree where it could run if necessary. Then she approached the mill with one hand on the concealed dagger and every sense heightened. The voice that greeted her was the last one she expected. "Hello, Evelyn. Thank you for coming." Evelyn stepped through the doorway and stopped dead, her entire understanding of the past 3 weeks shattering like ice under sudden weight. Selina Ashford stood in the center of the ruined mill, dressed in dark traveling clothes, her auburn hair pinned severely back. But it wasn't her presence that shocked Evelyn into silence. It was the woman standing beside her, Lady Margot Thorne, and the expression on Margot's face wasn't hostile or triumphant, it was apologetic. Evelyn's hand tightened on the dagger. This is an interesting partnership. Margot held up both hands in a gesture of peace. Not what you think. I didn't betray you, Your Grace. I saved your life. Though I realize that's going to be difficult to believe. You dissolved our contracts. You left me defenseless. Evelyn's voice was ice. If that's salvation, I'd hate to see your version of murder. The contracts had to be dissolved publicly because someone was about to use them to destroy you. Margot moved slowly toward a makeshift table where papers were spread out. Someone who'd infiltrated both our houses, who had access to our communications, who was building a legal case that would have implicated you in conspiracy with foreign powers. If the partnership had continued, you'd have been arrested for treason within a week. Evelyn looked at Selina. And you? Where do you fit in this nightmare? Selina's face was pale but determined. I disappeared after the tribunal because I realized who'd actually recruited me to seduce Adrian. It wasn't just my father's merchant friends. They were working for someone else. Someone who's been orchestrating everything from the beginning. Who? Margot gestured to the papers on the table. Come see for yourself. But I warn you, Your Grace, what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you understood about Adrian's fall. Eveline approached cautiously, keeping both women in her peripheral vision. The papers were covered in names, dates, financial transactions, all connected by lines that formed a web of conspiracy. At the center of the web, written in Margot's precise handwriting, was a name that made Evelyn's blood freeze. Lord Pemberton. That's impossible. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. Pemberton presented the evidence at the tribunal. He supported my testimony. He played his role perfectly. Margot's voice was grim. Pemberton has been working with foreign merchant consortiums for 5 years, helping them infiltrate our trade networks. Adrian's corruption was useful to them because it provided cover for their own operations. When you decided to expose Adrian, Pemberton saw an opportunity. He could use your evidence to remove Adrian, appear to be a champion of justice, and position himself to control the resulting power vacuum. But he helped me. He presented the documents that destroyed Adrian, because your documents were legitimate and unstoppable. Margot moved to stand beside the table. Pemberton didn't help you out of justice. He helped you because co-opting your attack was easier than stopping it. And once Adrian was gone, he began the second phase, destroying you and installing someone he could fully control in your place. Evelyn's mind raced through the past weeks with new understanding. The reopened investigation, the coalition regrouping, the Thorne withdrawal that left her vulnerable. All of it coordinated, all of it timed perfectly to isolate and eliminate her. Why tell me this? Evelyn looked between the two women. Why help me now? Margot's expression was unreadable. Because Pemberton approached me 3 days before I dissolved our contracts. He showed me fabricated evidence suggesting you were planning to betray House Thorne to foreign interests. He said if I didn't cut ties immediately, my family would be implicated in your treason. I checked his documentation. It was flawless, completely convincing. So I withdrew publicly to protect my house. But you didn't believe it. I believed it for about 6 hours. Then Selina contacted me with information about Pemberton's actual operations, and I realized I'd been played. Margot's jaw tightened. He used me to isolate you, Your Grace, and I fell for it because his evidence was that good. Selina stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together. I reached out to Lady Margot because after the tribunal, I started investigating who'd really recruited me. My father thought he was working with independent merchants. But the money came through channels controlled by Pemberton's consortium. They identified Adrian as someone they could manipulate years ago. They arranged for me to meet him, to seduce him, to keep him useful and controllable. And when I decided to destroy him, Evelyn's voice was hollow. They let you. Selina's face showed genuine regret. Because Pemberton saw that your evidence was too strong to suppress, so he changed strategies. He helped you destroy Adrian, then positioned himself to destroy you and take control of everything Adrian had built. The consortium gets their puppet in power. Pemberton gets wealth and influence. You get eliminated. Evelyn moved to the broken window, staring out at the dark forest. Her reflection in the cracked glass looked fractured, broken into pieces. How much of this can you prove? Margot picked up a folder. Enough to expose Pemberton's foreign connections. Enough to show he falsified the evidence used to reopen the investigation against you. Enough to destroy his credibility at court. But she hesitated. Not enough to save you from the charges he's already filed. The conspiracy is too deep, Your Grace. Even exposing Pemberton won't make the treason allegations disappear. Too many people have invested in your destruction. So I'm trapped. Evelyn's laugh was bitter. Even with the truth, I lose. Not necessarily. Margot's voice took on a harder edge. There's one option, but you won't like it. Try me. Disappear. Tonight. Leave everything behind. The title, the estate, your name. I can get you out of the kingdom with enough money to start over somewhere Pemberton's reach doesn't extend. Selina and I will feed false information about where you went, buy you time to vanish completely. The room fell silent except for the wind howling through the broken walls. Evelyn turned slowly to face them. You want me to run, to abandon everything I fought for, to let them win. I want you to survive. Margot's voice was firm. You can't fight Pemberton and the consortium and the coalition all at once. They have the king's ear, control of the courts, and unlimited resources. Staying means facing charges you can't beat. Even if you could prove your innocence, they'd manufacture new accusations. You'd spend the rest of your life fighting shadows while they destroy everything you care about. And if I disappear, you live. Maybe you rebuild somewhere else. Maybe you never regain what you lost. But you'd be alive and free. Evelyn looked at Selina. What about you? Where do you go after this? Selina's smile was sad. Somewhere far from politics and power plays. I've learned my lesson about getting involved in things I don't understand. I just wanted to help stop Pemberton from destroying someone else the way he destroyed my father and Adrian and tried to destroy you. Evelyn moved back to the table, studying the web of names and connections. Her entire life was in that web. Every battle she'd fought, every sacrifice she'd made, every victory she'd thought she'd won. All of it manipulated, controlled, used by forces she'd never even seen moving. She thought about Adrian, rotting in prison, still believing he'd been the master of his own schemes. She thought about Margot, forced to betray an alliance to protect her family. She thought about Selina, recruited as a weapon without understanding whose hand held the blade. Everyone was being used. Everyone was dancing to rhythms they couldn't quite hear. And now Evelyn was being offered the same choice she'd given Selina 3 weeks ago. Run or be destroyed. How long do I have to decide? Margot checked the position of the moon through the broken roof. 3 hours until dawn. If you're leaving, it needs to be tonight. I have a ship waiting at the port. After sunrise, Pemberton will have soldiers at every exit point. This is your only window. 3 hours to decide whether to abandon everything or face destruction with her eyes open. 3 hours to choose between survival and principle. 3 hours to become someone completely different or die as the person she'd always been. Evelyn moved to the doorway and looked out at the frozen forest. Somewhere beyond those trees was Ravenspire Castle, the home she'd rebuilt, the staff who'd chosen to stand with her, the legacy she'd tried to protect. Somewhere beyond that was the kingdom that had watched her destroy her husband and now wanted to destroy her in turn. And somewhere beyond all of it was the possibility of a life without any of this weight, this history, this endless battle. It should have been an easy choice. It was the hardest decision of her life. 2 hours before dawn, Evelyn made her choice. She returned to Ravenspire Castle alone, leaving Margot and Selina in the ruined mill with instructions to wait until sunrise. The ride back felt longer than the ride out, each mile heavy with finality. The castle emerged from the darkness like a judgment, beautiful, imposing, and utterly indifferent to the choices being made within its walls. Marcus met her at the stable, his face lined with worry. "My lady, thank God. I was about to send... I need you to gather certain documents from my study." Evelyn dismounted and handed him the reins. "Financial records, correspondence, the journal I kept about Adrian's activities, everything that proves the truth about what happened." "Can you do that quickly?" "Of course, but why? And I need you to protect the staff. Whatever happens in the coming days, make sure they're not punished for my actions. Use whatever money remains to see them cared for." "Marcus," her voice softened slightly, "you've served this house faithfully for 37 years. I'm releasing you from that service. Take what you need. and leave before this gets worse. Marcus's weathered face crumpled with understanding. You're not running. It was a statement, not a question. No, I'm not. My lady, they'll destroy you. You can't fight this. I know. Evelyn moved past him toward the castle entrance. But I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do, what I can't fight, what I have to accept. I destroyed my husband because I was done accepting. And I'm not starting again just because the enemy got bigger. That's not courage, my lady. That's suicide. Maybe. She paused at the door. Or maybe it's the only way to actually win. They want me silent, discredited, erased. Running gives them that victory without a fight. Staying means making them work for it, means exposing everything in a trial they can't completely control, means forcing Pemberton to show his hand in front of the entire kingdom. And when they convict you anyway, then at least I'll know I didn't spend the rest of my life hiding. Evelyn's voice was steady, resolved. Go, Marcus. Get those documents. We have work to do before dawn. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. As you command, Your Grace. Though for what it's worth, his voice roughened with emotion, it's been an honor serving you. A true honor. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness of the castle. Evelyn stood alone in the courtyard as the first hints of false dawn began lightening the eastern sky. The temperature was dropping, that brutal cold that came just before sunrise, and her breath steamed in the air like a ghost escaping. She thought about Margot's offer of escape. A ship, a new life, freedom from all of this. It was a good offer, a smart offer. But Evelyn was done being smart if smart meant surrendering. She climbed the steps to the castle entrance and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Inside, the great hall was dark and silent, the chandeliers unlit, the space cavernous and cold. This was where she'd destroyed Adrian 3 weeks ago. This was where she'd thought she'd won her freedom. How naive that seemed now. Catherine appeared from a side passage, her young face anxious. My lady, Marcus told me to prepare traveling supplies. Are we leaving? No, Catherine, we're staying, but I need you to do something for me. Evelyn moved to the central staircase. There's a hidden compartment in my writing desk, left side, bottom drawer. Inside is a letter I wrote months ago. I need you to deliver it to someone specific when I'm arrested. My lady, you can't. Listen carefully. The letter goes to the king's sister, Princess Helena. Not through normal channels, personally, hand to hand. Helena and I were friends before I married Adrian. She might be the only person at court who'll question the official narrative. Can you do that? Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Yes, my lady. I'll get it to her even if I have to walk through fire. Good. Now go. Take what you need and leave the castle before sunrise. I won't have you caught up in what's coming. But my lady, that's an order, Catherine. Go. The girl fled, sobbing, leaving Evelyn alone in the vast hall. She climbed to her study and found Marcus already there, documents spread across the desk in organized piles. His expression was controlled, professional, but his hands shook slightly as he worked. Everything you asked for, my lady. Financial records, correspondence, your journal. I've also included documentation of the Thorn Alliance and its dissolution. If you're going to make your case, this is your arsenal. Thank you, Marcus. Evelyn began reviewing the papers, checking dates and signatures. When Pemberton's soldiers come, they'll find everything in order and impossible to suppress. Marcus's voice was firm. You're forcing them to arrest you publicly, with documented evidence of your innocence readily available. It's a gamble, my lady. It's the only play I have left. She looked up at him. You should go too, Marcus. While there's still time. With respect, Your Grace, I'm staying. Someone needs to manage this disaster, and you clearly can't be trusted to do it sensibly. Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. Stubborn old man, runs in the household apparently. Marcus returned the smile grimly. Now, what do we do while we wait for dawn and the inevitable catastrophe? We have tea. Evelyn moved to the door. Because some things are worth maintaining even when the world is ending, and proper morning tea is one of them. They descended to the morning room together, two people who'd served House Blackthorn through prosperity and corruption and destruction, and they sat in the growing light of dawn drinking tea like nothing was wrong. Outside, the sun finally crept above the horizon, painting the snow-covered grounds in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful enough to break your heart. The soldiers arrived an hour later. 20 royal guards led by a captain Eveline didn't recognize, their armor polished, their faces professionally blank. They entered the castle with military precision, their boots echoing through the halls like drumbeats. Marcus intercepted them in the great hall. "State your business." The captain produced a sealed warrant. "We're here to arrest Duchess Evelyn Ashcombe on charges of treason, conspiracy with foreign powers, and falsification of crown documents, by order of the King's Privy Council." Evelyn appeared at the top of the grand staircase before Marcus could respond. She'd changed into a formal gown of deep blue velvet, her grandmother's diamonds at her throat, her hair perfectly arranged. She looked like someone about to attend court, not prison. "I'm here, Captain. There's no need for drama." She descended the stairs with measured grace. "I assume you have paperwork to serve?" The captain looked momentarily nonplussed by her composure. "Your Grace, Yes. The warrant specifies immediate arrest and transport to the capital for trial." "Then let's not waste time." Eveline accepted the papers and scanned them quickly. "These charges are fabricated, Captain. I have documentation proving my innocence, which my steward will provide to my legal representation, but I'll come peacefully. I have nothing to hide." The captain gestured to his men. "Your Grace, if you'll come with us." "One moment." Eveline turned to Marcus. "You know what needs to be done. Make sure those documents reach the right people." "And Marcus," her voice softened, "thank you for everything." Marcus's weathered face was wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. "It's been my honor, Your Grace, my deepest honor." Then Eveline turned back to the soldiers and held out her wrists. "No need for restraints, Captain. I said I'd come peacefully, and I meant it. I'm not running, not anymore." The captain hesitated, then nodded to his men. "Escort her Grace to the transport." They led her through the castle she'd rebuilt, past servants who'd chosen to stand with her, through doors she'd walked 1,000 times. The great hall, the portrait gallery, the entrance courtyard, all of it passing like a final goodbye. As they loaded her into the enclosed carriage, Eveline looked back at Ravenspire Castle one last time. The morning sun made the stones glow gold, the windows sparkle like jewels. It looked like something from a story, a fortress where heroes lived and justice prevailed. The illusion was beautiful while it lasted. The carriage door closed, shutting out the view. The soldiers mounted their horses, and Duchess Evelyn Ashcombe began the journey to her trial for crimes she didn't commit, armed only with truth that might not be enough to save her. But as the carriage rolled through the castle gates and onto the road leading to the capital, Evelyn felt something unexpected settle over her. Not fear, not despair. Relief. Because she'd made her choice. She'd rejected the easy escape and chosen to fight, even knowing she might lose. She'd forced Pemberton and his consortium to arrest her publicly, to charge her formally, to expose their machinery to daylight. Maybe she'd lose anyway. Probably she would. But at least she'd lose on her own terms, standing for something instead of running from everything. And in a life that had been defined by other people's choices for far too long, that autonomy, that simple, terrible freedom to choose her own destruction, felt like the first real victory she'd ever won. The carriage wheels creaked through the snow. The guards rode in formation around her. And Evelyn, Duchess of Blackthorn, architect of her husband's fall and target of forces she'd never fully understood, sat in the dim interior and faced what came next with her eyes wide open. They arrived at the capital as twilight fell, the city lights beginning to glow against the darkening sky. Evelyn was taken directly to the tower, not the royal prison for common criminals, but the high-security fortress where nobles accused of treason awaited trial. Her cell was small but clean, with a narrow window overlooking the river. Better than a dungeon, worse than freedom. That first night, alone in the cold stone room, Evelyn finally allowed herself to feel everything she'd been suppressing. The fear, the rage, the bone-deep exhaustion of fighting battles that never seemed to end. She permitted herself exactly 1 hour of despair. Then she washed her face in the basin provided, straightened her dress, and began planning her defense. The trial was set for 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to prepare, to gather allies, to find a way through the machinery working to destroy her. It wasn't much time. It probably wasn't enough. But it was what she had. A guard brought her dinner, bread, cheese, watered wine, and wordlessly passed her a folded note hidden beneath the tray. Evelyn waited until he left before opening it. Your Grace, your arrest was noted by those who matter. Evidence is being compiled, support is being organized. You're not as alone as they want you to believe. Hold fast, the truth hasn't finished speaking yet. Princess Helena, her old friend, the one person at court who might actually question the official narrative. Evelyn tucked the note beneath her pillow and ate her meager dinner in silence. Outside her narrow window, the city continued its evening business, lamps being lit, shops closing, people returning to homes and families and lives uncomplicated by conspiracy. She envied them, but she wouldn't trade places with them. Because however this ended, in vindication or destruction, at least she'd be ending it as herself, not as Adrian's wife, not as anyone's pawn or puppet, just Evelyn, who'd made her own choices and accepted their consequences. The night deepened. The river outside her window turned black as ink, and in her cell in the tower, Evelyn Ashcombe closed her eyes and prepared for the final battle of a war she'd never wanted to fight. A war that would determine whether truth actually mattered in a world built on lies. A war she still might lose, but a war where, for the first time in her entire life, she was fighting for herself instead of merely surviving others' cruelty. And that difference, that fundamental shift from victim to combatant, changed everything. Even if the only victory available was choosing how to fall, at least it would be her choice, her fall, her ending. And in a world that had spent decades telling her what she couldn't control, that tiny, terrible freedom was the most dangerous power she'd ever held. Because a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to expose doesn't play by the rules that once constrained her. She burns them down and forces everyone to face what rises from the ashes. The trial would begin in 14 days. Pemberton thought he'd already won. He had no idea what Evelyn had become when he backed her into this final corner. Not a duchess anymore. Not a wife or a victim or a political pawn. Something sharper, colder, infinitely more ruthless. Something that had learned exactly how power worked by watching it destroy everything she'd tried to build. And now, with nothing left to protect and nothing left to fear, she was about to teach them all what happened when you left someone like her with only one option: scorched earth. The 14 days before the trial moved with the slow, grinding inevitability of an execution countdown. Each morning, Evelyn woke in her cell to the sound of the river below and the distant bells marking the hours. Each night, she lay awake planning strategies, reviewing evidence, preparing for a battle she knew was rigged against her from the start. But something had shifted in those 2 weeks. Something fundamental in how she thought about power and survival, and what victory actually meant when you'd already lost everything that mattered. She wasn't fighting to win anymore. That ship had sailed the moment Pemberton soldiers dragged her from Ravenspire Castle. She was fighting to leave a mark deep enough that it couldn't be erased, to make sure that when they destroyed her, everyone watching would understand exactly what had been destroyed and why. Scorched earth wasn't about survival. It was about making sure your enemies paid the full price for their victory. Princess Helena visited on the 3rd day, slipping through the tower's security with the kind of casual authority that came from royal blood. She was 40 years old, sharp-featured and sharper-minded, with eyes that saw through pretense like glass. She'd been Evelyn's friend before politics, and marriage had complicated everything, back when they were just 2 intelligent women trying to navigate a world built for men. They sat across from each other in the sparse visiting room, guards stationed outside, and for a long moment neither spoke. Finally, Helena broke the silence. You look terrible. Evelyn's smile was thin. Prison doesn't agree with me. Who knew? This is insane, Evelyn. These charges. Helena gestured dismissively. Everyone knows they're fabricated. Half the court is whispering about Pemberton's involvement, but whispers don't stop tribunals. No, they don't. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Did you receive my documentation? The evidence Marcus was supposed to deliver? I did. Helena's expression darkened. It's damning. It proves Pemberton has been working with foreign merchants, proves he falsified evidence against you, proves he orchestrated this entire conspiracy. But Evelyn, her voice dropped. It's not enough. The Privy Council is controlled by people who profit from this arrangement. They're not going to let truth derail their plans. I know. Evelyn's voice was steady, almost calm, but I'm not trying to convince the Privy Council. I'm trying to convince the kingdom. There's a difference between private judgment and public record. If I can expose Pemberton during the trial, in front of nobles and diplomats and scribes recording every word for history, then even if they convict me, the truth becomes part of the official narrative. Suppression gets harder, questions persist. So you're planning to martyr yourself for transparency. Helena's tone was acid. That's your strategy? My strategy is to force them to destroy me openly, completely, with undeniable evidence of their corruption available for anyone willing to look. Evelyn met her old friend's eyes. I've spent my whole life watching powerful men rewrite history to suit their convenience. Adrian did it with our marriage. Pemberton is doing it with my prosecution. I'm done letting them control the narrative. If I'm going down, I'm dragging the truth down with me so loudly that ignoring it becomes impossible. Helena was quiet for a long moment, studying Evelyn's face. You've changed. You used to be careful, strategic, always playing the long game. This is reckless? Evelyn's smile had no warmth. That's what happens when you take everything from someone. They stop caring about consequences and start caring about damage. I don't have a long game anymore, Helena. I just have this trial and whatever chaos I can create before they silence me. Helena pulled a folded document from her jacket. Then you'll want this. It's a witness statement from someone who worked in Pemberton's household. He's willing to testify that Pemberton received payments from foreign merchants and falsified correspondence. It's not enough to stop your conviction, but it's enough to destroy Pemberton's credibility if it gets entered into the record. Evelyn took the document with shaking hands. Why is he willing to testify? He must know it's career suicide. His daughter was arrested on false charges 6 months ago. She died in custody before trial. Helena's voice was flat. He wants revenge more than he wants safety. Sound familiar? Evelyn pressed the paper against her chest, feeling something like hope stir beneath the exhaustion. Get him to the trial. Whatever it takes. If he testifies, Pemberton can't bury this quietly. Already arranged. He'll be called as a surprise witness on the second day. Helena stood to leave. Evelyn, I can't protect you from what's coming, but I can make sure people are watching when it happens. That's the best I can offer. It's more than I had 3 days ago. Thank you, Helena, for not forgetting me. Helena's expression softened slightly. You were my friend when being my friend gained you nothing. I don't forget loyalty, even when politics demands it. She left, and Evelyn was alone again with the river sounds and the ticking clock of days she had left to prepare. The trial began on a morning so cold the Thames had frozen solid in places, great sheets of ice jutting from the water like broken teeth. The grand chamber was packed beyond capacity, every seat filled, nobles standing along the walls, foreign ambassadors crowding the galleries. Word had spread that this would be more than a routine treason trial. This would be a spectacle. They had no idea how right they were. Evelyn was led into the chamber in chains, a deliberate humiliation that made several nobles gasp. She wore the same blue velvet gown she'd been arrested in, now wrinkled and stained from 2 weeks in a cell, her hair simply braided, her face pale but composed. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd been dragged through hell and emerged with her spine still intact. The judges entered, 7 of them again, but a different composition this time. Lord Pemberton sat at the center, his face professionally sympathetic, his eyes cold as winter. Beside him were 6 justices Evelyn recognized as either his allies or men too compromised to oppose him. The fix was so blatant, it would have been funny if her life wasn't the stakes. Lord Chancellor Whitmore, who'd presided over Adrian's tribunal, was notably absent, replaced by a younger man whose name Evelyn didn't recognize. That told her everything about how thoroughly Pemberton had prepared. The lead judge, Lord Justice Harrow, 60 years old, with a face like carved granite, opened the proceedings with mechanical efficiency. Duchess Evelyn Ashcombe, you stand accused of treason against the crown, conspiracy with foreign powers, and falsification of royal documents. How do you plead? Evelyn stood with as much dignity as chains allowed. Not guilty. And I demand the right to present evidence proving these charges are fabrications designed to conceal the actual conspiracy within the Privy Council itself. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Pemberton's face remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Careful calculation. He'd been expecting defiance. Harrow's gavel silenced the crowd. You'll have opportunity to present your defense, Your Grace. But first, the Crown will present evidence of your crimes. Lord Pemberton, you may proceed. Pemberton stood with the graceful confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. My lords, what we have here is a tragedy of ambition unchecked by morality. Duchess Ashcombe destroyed her husband, rightly so, given his corruption. But in doing so, she acquired a taste for power that eclipsed her judgment. The evidence will show that she conspired with foreign merchants to seize control of Blackthorn trade routes, falsified documents to frame her husband for crimes he didn't commit, and manipulated this very court to eliminate her enemies. That's a lie. Evelyn's voice cut through his speech like a blade. And I can prove it's a lie if you'll allow actual evidence instead of scripted theater. Harrow's gavel cracked again. You'll have your turn, Your Grace. Lord Pemberton, continue. The prosecution took 6 hours. 6 hours of carefully constructed lies backed by forged documents, coached witnesses, and evidence so expertly fabricated that even Evelyn, who knew it was false, could see how convincing it appeared. They painted her as a woman driven mad by betrayal, whose justified anger at Adrian's infidelity had metastasized into something darker. They showed financial records, completely fake, suggesting she'd been embezzling from the estate for years. They produced witnesses, mostly people she'd never met, claiming she'd approached them about illegal trade arrangements. It was masterful. Pemberton had learned from Adrian's destruction exactly how to construct an airtight case that would withstand scrutiny. Almost airtight, because there were cracks. Small ones, barely visible, but Evelyn had spent 2 weeks identifying them. Dates that didn't quite align, signatures that looked slightly off, testimonies that contradicted each other in tiny, significant ways. The kind of flaws that emerged when you were manufacturing evidence quickly and counting on intimidation to prevent close examination. When the prosecution finally rested, it was late afternoon. Harrow looked exhausted and satisfied. The defense may begin its presentation tomorrow morning. This court is adjourned until... I'd like to begin now. Evelyn's voice rang through the chamber. If the court can spare a few more hours, I have evidence that cannot wait. Harrow frowned. Your Grace, the hour is late. Surely your defense can wait until... Can it? Evelyn took a step forward, her chains rattling. Because I'm sitting in a cell where evidence has a tendency to disappear, where witnesses find themselves suddenly unavailable, where documents go missing. If I don't present my case now, while people are watching, I may not get another chance. Unless that's the point? The challenge was blatant, public, impossible to ignore. Harrow's face darkened, but he was trapped. Refusing her request would look like exactly what it was, suppression. Very well. 2 hours. Then we adjourn regardless. Present your opening evidence. Evelyn gestured to the corner where Marcus stood with a wooden chest. The old steward came forward slowly, his weathered face set in grim determination. He'd been allowed into the chamber as her personal representative, though guards flanked him closely. My lords, Evelyn began, her voice steady and clear. The prosecution has painted me as a woman consumed by ambition and revenge. They're half right. I am consumed by something, but it's not ambition, it's accuracy. I spent 3 years documenting my husband's crimes because I knew that without irrefutable evidence, no one would believe me. A wife accusing her husband? That's just bitter feminine hysteria, isn't it? So I built a case that couldn't be dismissed. She nodded to Marcus, who opened the chest and began distributing documents to the judges. These are the original financial records from the Blackthorn estate, not the modified versions the prosecution showed you. The originals with dates, signatures, and third-party verification. You'll notice they don't match what Lord Pemberton presented. That's because his versions are forgeries. Pemberton's expression remained calm, but his hands tightened on the table in front of him. Your Grace, these documents could easily be the forgeries. Could be. Evelyn's voice sharpened, except they're notarized by the Royal Accountant's Office and cross-referenced with Crown tax records. Unless you're suggesting the Crown's own documentation is false? That would be an interesting argument for someone supposedly defending Crown interests. Direct hit. Several judges began comparing the documents, their expressions shifting from skeptical to confused to concerned. Evelyn pressed forward. The prosecution claims I embezzled from the estate. These records prove every transaction I made was legitimate and documented. The prosecution claims I conspired with foreign merchants. I have correspondence proving those merchants approached me without solicitation, and I refused their offers. The prosecution claims I falsified evidence against my husband. I have third-party verification of every crime I documented. She moved closer to the judge's bench, chains forcing her to shuffle awkwardly, but her voice never wavering. Every single charge against me relies on evidence that contradicts official records. Every witness who testified against me has financial connections to, she pulled out Helena's document, this consortium of foreign merchants. The same merchants who've been trying to infiltrate our trade networks for 5 years. The same merchants who've been paying Lord Pemberton to facilitate their access. The chamber erupted. Nobles shouted over each other. Pemberton shot to his feet, his face finally showing cracks. That's a baseless accusation. Is it? Evelyn held up the witness statement Helena had provided. This is testimony from a member of your household, my lord. He'll be here tomorrow to confirm that you received regular payments from foreign interests in exchange for political favors, that you falsified evidence against me specifically to remove the one person who'd exposed corruption in someone you were using as a proxy. Harrow's gavel was slamming repeatedly, barely maintaining order. This is highly irregular. What's irregular is a member of the Privy Council manufacturing treason charges against someone who threatened his schemes. Evelyn's voice rose above the chaos. You want to convict me? Fine. But do it knowing that everyone in this chamber has seen the evidence. Everyone knows what you're protecting, and everyone will remember that when you lie about what happened here today. The 2 hours stretched into 4 as Evelyn systematically dismantled the prosecution's case. She presented financial records that contradicted their timelines. She showed correspondence that proved Pemberton had approached her multiple times trying to recruit her into schemes she'd refused. She demonstrated how every piece of evidence against her traced back to the same network of foreign merchants and compromised officials. It wasn't enough to prove her innocence, not when the judges were bought and paid for, but it was enough to create doubt, to make conviction look like exactly what it was: political assassination. By the time Harrow finally adjourned for the night, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted. The nobles who'd come expecting a straightforward treason trial had instead witnessed something messier, more complex, more damning to everyone involved. Evelyn was led back to her cell, physically exhausted but mentally sharp. She'd landed the first real blow. Tomorrow, with Helena's witness, she'd land another. The question was whether it would matter when the judges had already decided her fate. Bakab. The second day began with blood. Evelyn was woken before dawn by shouting in the corridor outside her cell, guards running, someone screaming, the sound of violence moving closer. She was on her feet instantly, pressing against the cell door trying to see what was happening. Through the small barred window she glimpsed shadows struggling, heard the wet sound of blade meeting flesh, smelled copper and fear. Then silence. Heavy, absolute, terrifying. The lock on her cell clicked open. The door swung inward, and Lady Margot Thorne stepped through, blood spattered across her traveling clothes, a short sword in her hand. We're leaving, now. Evelyn stared at her in complete incomprehension. What? How? Questions later. Margot grabbed her arm and pulled her into the corridor. 3 guards lay dead or unconscious on the stone floor. 2 more stood at the end of the passage, Thorne soldiers, their faces grim. We have perhaps 10 minutes before the alarm spreads. Move. I'm not running. Evelyn wrenched her arm free. I'm in the middle of exposing Pemberton. If I disappear now, it validates every lie he's told about me. If you stay, you'll be convicted and executed within a week. Margot's pale eyes were fierce. Your witness, the one Princess Helena arranged, he's dead. Throat cut in his lodgings last night. Pemberton's people got to him before he could testify. Your evidence from yesterday has mysteriously gone missing from the court records. And Harrow received orders to accelerate the trial. Verdict by tomorrow, sentence carried out immediately. The words hit Evelyn like physical blows. The witness? Dead. The evidence? Gone. The truth she'd fought so hard to expose, suppressed again. Margot softened slightly. You fought well, Your Grace. You exposed more than anyone thought possible, but they're not playing by rules anymore. They're just going to kill you and rewrite what happened. Running isn't surrender, it's survival so you can fight another day. Evelyn looked at the dead guards, at Margot's blood-stained clothes, at the open door leading to freedom or flight, or whatever came after giving up the battle she'd chosen to fight. Every instinct screamed to keep fighting, to return to that chamber and force them to convict her publicly, with the whole kingdom watching, to make her destruction so visible it couldn't be hidden. But she thought about the witness with his throat cut, about evidence disappearing, about how thoroughly Pemberton controlled the machinery, and she understood with brutal clarity that staying meant dying for nothing. Her truth would be erased, her sacrifice would be forgotten. She'd just be another failed rebel whose story got edited into irrelevance. Sometimes survival wasn't surrender. Sometimes it was the only way to keep fighting. How much time? 6 minutes. Margot was already moving. There's a carriage waiting. We get you out of the capital tonight. Tomorrow we regroup and figure out how to continue this from outside their reach. Eveline took one last look at her cell, the place where she'd prepared to burn everything down rather than accept defeat quietly. Then she followed Margot into the corridor, stepping over bodies, moving fast through passages that shouldn't have been accessible but somehow were. Because the Thorns, for all their political calculations, understood that sometimes you needed to break rules to change them. They emerged into a courtyard where dawn was just breaking, gray and cold. A closed carriage waited, horses stamping nervously. Selena sat in the driver's seat, reins in hand, her face set in determined lines. She looked at Eveline and something passed between them. Two women who'd been used as weapons by men who thought they were disposable. Two survivors of schemes they'd never fully controlled. "Get in." Selena's voice was steady. "We're not doing the noble sacrifice thing. We're doing the live to fight another day thing. You can argue about it later." Eveline climbed into the carriage. Margot followed, pulling the door shut. And then they were moving, wheels clattering over cobblestones, leaving the tower behind as alarm bells finally began to ring. Inside the enclosed carriage, Eveline sat in stunned silence while her entire understanding of the situation rearranged itself. She'd been prepared to die, had made peace with destruction as the price of truth. And now she was running, rescued by the same woman who'd betrayed her and the same woman who'd helped destroy Adrian. The irony was almost too much. "You're angry." Margot's voice broke the silence. "I'm confused." Eveline looked at her. "Yesterday you were telling me to flee. I refused. Now you've killed guards and broken me out by force. Which version of this is real?" "Both." Margot wiped blood from her sword with a cloth. "I wanted you to choose survival. You chose martyrdom. I respect that choice, but when I learned Pemberton was going to have you quietly murdered in your cell and claim you'd taken your own life out of guilt," she met Eveline's eyes. "That changed the equation. That wasn't justice. That was erasure. So I changed the board. By starting a war." Eveline gestured at the blood-stained clothes. "You just killed royal guards. The Thorns will be implicated. You've made yourselves targets. We were already targets." Margot's smile was cold. "Pemberton's consortium doesn't tolerate neutrality. After I dissolved our partnership to protect you, they approached me demanding full cooperation or they'd destroy my family next. I was going to be forced to choose sides regardless. I chose yours. Why? Because you're the only person I've met in years who actually fights for something beyond personal gain." Margot leaned back against the carriage wall. Everyone else at court is just maneuvering for advantage, protecting wealth, pursuing power for its own sake. You actually believe truth matters, that justice exists. It's naive as hell, but it's also the only thing preventing this kingdom from complete moral collapse. So yes, I'm risking my family to protect you, because if we let them erase every voice that demands accountability, we're all just serfs pretending to be nobles. The carriage rattled through the waking city, taking back streets and alleys to avoid patrols. Outside, Eveline could hear the distant sounds of alarms spreading. More bells shouted orders, the thunder of mounted soldiers beginning their search. "Where are we going?" "Port." Margot checked her weapons with practiced efficiency. "Ship leaves in 2 hours. We'll be out of territorial waters before they organize a proper pursuit. And then we regroup. Build a network outside Pemberton's reach. Document everything we know about his conspiracy. Find allies who care more about truth than politics. And we plan how to take him down properly, not in a rigged court, but through exposure so public and undeniable that even his bought judges can't protect him. That could take years." "Yes, probably." Margot's expression was matter of fact. This is the long war, Your Grace, not the glorious last stand. Can you live with that? Evelyn thought about everything she was leaving behind. Ravenspire Castle, the household staff who'd stood with her, the public vindication she'd been preparing to claim, the ending she'd written for herself. All of it gone now, abandoned for survival and the uncertain promise of future justice. It should have felt like defeat. Instead, it felt like the first breath after drowning. I can live with it. Her voice was steady. But Margot, when we come back, and we will come back, Pemberton doesn't get a trial. He doesn't get mercy. He gets exactly what he tried to give me. Erasure, destruction, the full weight of his crimes exposed until there's nothing left but ash and testimony. Margot's smile was sharp as broken glass. Now you're thinking like a thorn. Welcome to the family business, Your Grace. We call it scorched earth politics. The carriage emerged from the narrow streets onto the wider avenue leading to the port. Dawn had fully broken, pale light washing over a city that didn't yet know its carefully constructed order had just been shattered by three women refusing to stay in their assigned roles. At the docks, a ship waited, merchant vessel flying thorn colors, crew already preparing to cast off. They boarded quickly, moving with the practiced urgency of people who knew pursuit was inevitable. Evelyn stood at the rail as the ship pulled away from the dock, watching the capital recede into morning mist. Somewhere in that city, Pemberton was learning about her escape. Somewhere, judges were scrambling to rewrite the narrative. Somewhere, Adrian still rotted in prison, probably laughing bitterly at how his wife's grand crusade had ended in flight. Let them think she'd lost. Let them believe they'd won. Because Evelyn understood something now that she hadn't at the beginning of this war. Victory wasn't about winning once. It was about refusing to stop fighting until the only people left standing were the ones who'd never learned to quit. Pemberton had taught her that. Adrian had taught her that. Every man who'd underestimated her had taught her that. And now she was going to teach them what happened when you gave someone like her, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge, time, resources, and allies who understood that some battles were worth burning your whole life down to win. The ship cleared the harbor. Sailors raised the mainsail. And Duchess Evelyn Ashcombe, fugitive from justice, and architect of the storm to come, turned her back on the kingdom that had tried to destroy her and faced the open sea with something fierce and cold and utterly unbreakable burning in her chest. Not hope. Hope was for people who believed in fair outcomes. This was certainty. The bone-deep knowledge that she would return, that Pemberton would pay, that everyone who'd participated in this conspiracy would face consequences they couldn't buy or intimidate their way out of. It might take years. It might cost everything she still had left. But she'd spend every day of those years becoming exactly what they'd tried to erase. The woman who refused to disappear, who documented everything, who built cases that couldn't be suppressed and networks that couldn't be broken. The woman who understood that real power didn't come from titles or wealth or political position. It came from being willing to lose everything in service of making sure the truth survived long enough to matter. 3 months after fleeing the capital, Evelyn stood in a rented room in a port city 200 miles from home, surrounded by maps and documents and correspondence from allies she'd never met, but who'd found her through reputation alone. The fugitive Duchess, who'd exposed corruption. The woman who'd fought a rigged trial and nearly won. The symbol of resistance against power that had stopped pretending to be accountable. Margot sat across from her, reviewing reports from agents embedded throughout the kingdom. Selina was managing communications with sources inside Pemberton's own household, people who'd decided that working for him was less appealing than destroying him. They'd built something in those 3 months. Not an army or a government in exile. Something more dangerous, a network of truth that kept growing despite every attempt to suppress it. Documents leaked. Witnesses came forward. Evidence piled up in locations Pemberton couldn't reach. And slowly, inevitably, the carefully constructed narrative of Evelyn's treason began to crumble as the reality of Pemberton's conspiracy spread through channels he couldn't control. The work was tedious, dangerous, unglamorous. Nothing like the dramatic confrontation Evelyn had imagined at her trial. Just day after day of patient documentation, careful recruitment, strategic leaks to people who still cared about accountability. But it was working. Margot looked up from her reports. her expression carefully neutral. "You should see this." She slid a document across the table. "It's from Princess Helena. Pemberton's been summoned before the Privy Council to answer questions about his foreign connections. They're not charging him yet, but they're investigating. Your documentation is forcing their hand." Evelyn read the letter twice, feeling something tight loosen in her chest. How long until they move against him officially? Months, probably. Maybe longer. Margot's voice was realistic. These things take time, political calculations, careful positioning, but the pressure is building. Every week, more evidence surfaces. More people come forward. Eventually, the council will have no choice but to act or look complicit. Eventually. Evelyn set down the letter. Not justice. Not yet. But progress. It would have to be enough. Because she'd learned something crucial in those 3 months of exile and patient warfare. Sometimes winning wasn't about the single decisive battle. Sometimes it was about outlasting your enemies. About being too stubborn to quit, too documented to ignore, too networked to suppress. Adrian had been defeated in one night because his crimes were obvious and his power was shallow. Pemberton would take years because his conspiracy was deep and his protections were strong. But both would fall eventually, because Evelyn had discovered the one weapon that no amount of wealth or political influence could fully defend against. A person with nothing left to lose who absolutely refused to shut up. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the foreign port city where she was building the foundation of Pemberton's destruction, brick by patient brick. Behind her, Margot and Selena continued their work. Around the kingdom, agents and allies and angry strangers who decided they were tired of being lied to continued theirs. And somewhere in the capital, Pemberton was just beginning to understand that the woman he'd tried to erase had instead become something far more dangerous than a duchess with a grievance. She'd become a network, a movement, a truth that kept spreading no matter how many times he tried to bury it. The war wasn't over. It might not be over for years, but for the first time since Adrian had ridden through those castle gates with his mistress, since Pemberton had orchestrated her destruction, since she'd been chained and tried and forced to flee, for the first time, Evelyn believed she would actually win. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not through any single dramatic confrontation, but eventually, inevitably. Through the slow grinding machinery of documented truth overwhelming political convenience. Because that was the real power she'd discovered in all of this. You can imprison a person. You can bury evidence. You can rig trials and buy judges and control narratives. But you can't stop an idea whose time has come. And the idea that powerful men should face consequences for their crimes, that simple revolutionary concept, had just found its champion in a woman who'd lost everything except her ability to remember, document, and refuse to disappear. Pemberton had tried to erase her. Instead, he'd created the instrument of his own destruction. And she was just getting started. 18 months after fleeing the capital, Evelyn stood on the deck of a merchant vessel approaching the harbor she'd left in chains and disgrace. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of weather that made everything look sharp and unforgiving, every detail rendered in brutal clarity. She'd changed in those 18 months, not in obvious ways, but in the fundamental architecture of who she was and what she believed about survival and justice, and the cost of both. The woman who'd escaped the tower had been fighting for vindication, for the satisfaction of watching her enemies destroyed as completely as they'd tried to destroy her. The woman returning now understood that vindication was just another word for closure, and closure was something you granted yourself, not something others could give you. Margot stood beside her at the rail, her silver hair whipping in the wind, her face showing the exhaustion of 18 months spent building a case that could survive contact with corruption. Behind them, Selena was below deck organizing the final documents, 3 trunks full of evidence, witness statements, financial records, correspondence. Everything they'd compiled through patient investigation and careful recruitment of people who'd decided they were done protecting powerful men from consequences. It's not too late to turn back. Margot's voice was quiet, meant only for Evelyn. We could deliver this evidence through intermediaries. Let someone else stand in front of the council. You don't have to walk back into their reach. Evelyn kept her eyes on the approaching city, watching the skyline emerge from morning mist. Yes, I do. Because if I hide while others present this case, Pemberton will claim I'm a fugitive too afraid to face justice. He'll make this about my cowardice instead of his corruption. I need to stand there myself and make them look at what they tried to bury. And if they arrest you again, if they ignore the evidence and reinstate the charges, then I'll have forced them to do it publicly, with every document we've gathered available to anyone who wants to look." Eveline's voice was steady, but something in it had changed, a quality of acceptance that hadn't been there before. "I used to think winning meant destroying my enemies and reclaiming what they took from me. Now I understand that winning is just making sure the truth survives long enough to matter. Everything else is just ego." That's surprisingly zen for someone who's about to walk into a potential trap. Eveline's smile was tired but genuine. 18 months of exile teaches you things, like how the only prison you can't escape is the one you build from needing validation from people who never deserved your respect in the first place. I don't need Pemberton destroyed anymore. I just need him exposed. There's a difference. The ship docked an hour later. No guards waited on the pier. Margot had arranged their arrival through channels that wouldn't trigger immediate alert. They disembarked quietly. 3 women in traveling clothes carrying trunks that contained the potential collapse of half the Privy Council's political infrastructure. The capital had changed in subtle ways. New construction in the merchant district, different soldiers patrolling the streets. The tension of a city where everyone knew something significant was shifting, but no one quite understood what. Evelyn moved through it all like a ghost, recognizing streets and buildings, but feeling no connection to them. This had been her home once, in the distant past when she'd been Adrian's wife, and believed that dignity and intelligence would eventually earn respect. That Evelyn was dead. The woman walking these streets now understood that respect was irrelevant and dignity was just performance. What mattered was documentation and persistence, and the willingness to outlast everyone trying to silence you. They made their way to Princess Helena's private residence, a townhouse in the noble quarter where Pemberton's surveillance was less thorough. Helena met them at a side entrance, her face showing the strain of 18 months spent navigating between supporting Evelyn and maintaining her position at court. She embraced Evelyn briefly, then pulled back to study her face. "You look different, older, harder." "I am harder." Evelyn's voice held no apology. You can't spend a year and a half building a case against corruption without learning exactly how deep it goes and how little most people care as long as it doesn't affect them personally. It changes your perspective on human nature. Helena gestured them inside. "The council has agreed to hear your petition. Tomorrow morning. They're calling it a review of your case, not a new trial. Pemberton insisted on that distinction. He wants to frame this as you begging for mercy, not presenting new evidence. Let him frame it however he wants." Margot set down one of the trunks with a heavy thud. "Once we start presenting documentation, the framing becomes irrelevant. Facts don't care about narrative control." They spent that evening in Helena's study, organizing documents by category and impact, preparing the presentation that would either vindicate 18 months of work or confirm that the system was too broken to repair. Evelyn worked with mechanical precision, her hands steady, her mind clear. She'd stopped feeling nervous about outcomes somewhere around month 6, when she'd realized that her peace of mind couldn't be dependent on whether powerful people chose to acknowledge truth. That revelation had been simultaneously freeing and devastating. Freeing because it meant she could stop trying to convince anyone. Devastating because it meant accepting that justice was optional in a world where power made its own rules. Near midnight, Helena brought them tea and sat watching Evelyn work. "What will you do if this fails? If they ignore everything and reinstate the charges?" Evelyn didn't look up from the document she was organizing. "Keep documenting. Keep recruiting witnesses. Keep building the case until it's too big to suppress. This isn't about one hearing or one decision. It's about creating a record that survives regardless of what happens to me. That's not a plan, Evelyn. That's martyrdom. Maybe." Evelyn finally met her old friend's eyes. "But I've learned something about martyrdom in the past 18 months. It's not about dying for a cause. It's about refusing to stop living for one, even when living becomes uncomfortable and dangerous and exhausting. I'm not trying to die for truth. I'm trying to make truth too documented to kill. There's a difference." Helena was quiet for a long moment. "You've changed. The Evelyn I knew wanted vindication and justice. You seem to have given up on both." "Not given up." Evelyn's smile was sad, just redefined. "Vindication is when other people acknowledge you were right. I don't need that anymore. And justice, real justice, isn't about punishing enemies. It's about preventing them from hurting anyone else. If exposing Pemberton's corruption protects one person from being destroyed the way he tried to destroy me, that's justice enough. Nay. The hearing convened in a smaller chamber than the grand trial room, a deliberate choice that signaled this wasn't being treated as a full proceeding. 7 council members presided, with Pemberton seated at the center, his face showing carefully constructed concern rather than the hostility he must have felt. He'd learned in 18 months not to underestimate Eveline's capacity for survival. The chamber was half full. Nobles who'd heard rumors of significant revelations, diplomats curious about the outcome, scribes positioned to record whatever transpired. Not the massive audience of the original trial, but enough witnesses that suppression would require obvious effort. Eveline entered without chains this time, flanked by Margot and Helena, followed by assistants carrying the 3 trunks of documentation. She wore dark blue wool, practical, elegant, completely unlike the dramatic gowns of her previous court appearances. She looked like someone who'd stopped performing and started simply existing in her own authority. Pemberton spoke first, his voice carrying the reasonable tone of someone being magnanimous. Duchess Ashcombe, we've agreed to this hearing at Princess Helena's request, though I must note that returning from fugitive status to petition the council shows a certain audacity. Eveline didn't rise to the bait. My lords, I'm here to present evidence of systematic corruption within your ranks. Evidence that explains why I was charged with treason, not because I committed any crime, but because I threatened to expose crimes committed by people who believed themselves untouchable. Lord Harrow, who'd presided over her trial, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. Your Grace, we've reviewed your case extensively. The charges against you were serious and supported by substantial evidence. What new information could possibly warrant? The evidence against me was fabricated by Lord Pemberton to prevent exposure of his conspiracy with foreign merchants. Eveline's voice was calm, factual. I have documentation proving his involvement, witness testimony from members of his own household, and financial records showing payments from the same consortium that recruited my husband's mistress to manipulate him. She nodded to Margot, who began distributing documents to the council members. These are bank transfers from Valdorian merchants to accounts controlled by Lord Pemberton. These are correspondence between Pemberton and those merchants discussing strategies for infiltrating our trade networks. These are witness statements from 14 people confirming that Pemberton approached them to falsify testimony against me. The chamber fell silent as council members began reading. Eveline watched their faces shift from skeptical to confused to carefully neutral. They were seeing evidence they couldn't easily dismiss, presented with a level of documentation that suggested extensive investigation. Pemberton's composure cracked slightly. These documents could easily be forgeries created during your Grace's time as a fugitive. Without proper verification, they're verified by third parties in 3 different countries. Eveline's voice sharpened. Unless you want to argue that I somehow coordinated an international conspiracy while fleeing charges of conspiracy, the provenance is solid. But let's address the larger issue, my lords. Why was I charged with treason? Not because I committed treason, because I exposed corruption in Duke Blackthorn that threatened to reveal Lord Pemberton's involvement in similar schemes. He couldn't suppress my evidence against Adrian, so he co-opted it, used it to appear righteous while positioning himself to eliminate me before I could expose his connections. Margot stepped forward with another set of documents. This is testimony from Lord Pemberton's former household steward, currently under protective custody in Thorn territory. He confirms that Pemberton received regular payments from foreign merchants and coordinated with them to recruit Selina Ashford specifically to manipulate Duke Blackthorn. The conspiracy I was accused of? It was real. I just wasn't part of it. The hours that followed were a careful dismantling of Pemberton's entire operation. Eveline presented evidence with clinical precision, each piece reinforcing the pattern, each witness statement corroborating the financial records. She didn't argue or dramatize. She simply laid out facts with the patience of someone who'd spent 18 months learning that truth's power came from accumulation, not performance. By early afternoon, several council members were looking at Pemberton with open suspicion. The man himself had gone pale, his usual smooth confidence replaced by the rigid tension of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. Finally, Lord Harrow called for recess. When they reconvened an hour later, his face was grave. Duchess Ashcombe, the council has reviewed your evidence. It's substantial, troubling. It warrants significant investigation. However, he paused, his discomfort obvious. The charges against you remain serious. Even if Lord Pemberton's involvement is problematic, the question of your own conduct, my conduct was documenting crimes and refusing to be silenced. Evelyn's voice was steady. If that's treasonous, then every honest person in this kingdom is guilty. But my lords, I'm not asking you to declare me innocent. I'm asking you to investigate the evidence I've presented, to determine whether Lord Pemberton used his position to manufacture charges against someone who threatened his schemes. The truth about my innocence will emerge from that investigation naturally. It was a strategic retreat, not demanding vindication, just requesting inquiry. It gave the council a way to act without admitting they'd been completely wrong. Political face-saving dressed as prudent governance. Harrow conferred quietly with the other council members. Then he spoke, his words careful and measured. The council will suspend all charges against Duchess Ashcombe pending a full investigation into the matters she's raised. Lord Pemberton, you are hereby placed under house arrest while we review these allegations. Your assets are frozen, and your position on this council is suspended. The chamber erupted, nobles shouted questions. Pemberton shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. This is absurd. She's a fugitive, a liar. You're dismissed, Lord Pemberton. Harrow's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Guards will escort you to your residence. This hearing is adjourned. Guards moved forward to flank Pemberton. The man who'd orchestrated Adrian's exposure and Evelyn's destruction stood frozen for a moment, seeming to understand for the first time that the machinery he'd controlled had turned against him. As they led him past Evelyn, he stopped and met her eyes. His voice was low, venomous. You think you've won. You've just made yourself a target for everyone who profits from the system I protected. Evelyn's response was quiet, almost gentle. I've been a target since I married Adrian. The difference now is I've stopped caring about safety and started caring about documentation. You can't destroy someone who's already lost everything and learn to live without it. Pemberton's face twisted. Then the guards pulled him away. The chamber slowly emptied, nobles departing in clusters to spread rumors and recalibrate alliances. Within hours, the entire capital would know that Pemberton had fallen and Evelyn had somehow, impossibly, survived. Helena approached as Evelyn gathered her documents. You did it. You actually did it. I documented it. Evelyn's correction was important. The council acted because ignoring this evidence would have made them look complicit. That's not the same as justice. That's just political calculation. Does the difference matter? You're free. The charges are suspended. Pemberton is finished. The charges are suspended pending investigation. That's not freedom. That's conditional tolerance. And Pemberton being finished doesn't undo what he did or prevent the next person from trying the same schemes. Evelyn met her old friend's eyes. I didn't do this for personal vindication, Helena. I did it to create a record, to prove that documentation and persistence can outlast corruption even when the system is rigged. Whether that actually changes anything, she gestured vaguely at the empty chamber. Time will tell. Margot joined them, her expression showing satisfaction but not triumph. The Thorne family formally requests that you return to Ravenspire Castle as our honored guest. Your household staff has been maintained in your absence. The estate is yours if you want it. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the castle she'd rebuilt and defended and ultimately fled. The home that represented both her marriage's failure and her own capacity for strategic patience. It should have felt like victory, being offered her life back. Instead, it felt like being offered a cage with better furnishings. I appreciate the offer. Evelyn's voice was careful, but I think I need time before returning to that life. The woman who lived in Ravenspire Castle, she doesn't exist anymore. I'm not sure the woman I've become belongs in that space. Then what will you do? Evelyn looked around the chamber where she'd just dismantled the conspiracy against her, then at the documents that had taken 18 months to compile. I'm going to keep doing this, investigating corruption, documenting abuse of power, building cases against people who think their positions make them immune to consequences. There's a network now, people who helped me with Pemberton, who want to continue this work. Someone needs to coordinate them. You're talking about becoming a professional exposer of corruption. Margot's tone was assessing. That's dangerous work, Your Grace. You'll make powerful enemies. I already have powerful enemies. At least this way I'm making them for a reason. Evelyn's smile was tired but genuine. I spent 15 years trying to be a perfect duchess, perfect wife, perfect political asset. It got me nothing but humiliation and betrayal. I spent 18 months learning how to be something else, something useful. I'm not going back to performing dignity for people who mistake it for weakness. 3 months after Pemberton's arrest, Evelyn stood in a modest office in a merchant district building, surrounded by filing cabinets full of ongoing investigations and a growing staff of researchers, investigators, and reform bureaucrats who'd decided they were done protecting corrupt officials. She'd declined the title's restoration, declined the estate's management, declined everything that would have returned her to the life she'd escaped. Instead, she'd built something new, an organization dedicated to exactly what she'd done to Pemberton: patient documentation of corruption, careful building of cases too comprehensive to suppress, strategic exposure of power that believed itself untouchable. They called it the Registry, and within months it had become simultaneously the most respected and most feared entity in the kingdom's political landscape. Nobles who'd once ignored her now sought her approval, terrified that their own schemes might become her next investigation. Merchants cleaned up their practices to avoid scrutiny. Officials who'd grown comfortable with bribes suddenly found themselves nervous about records they'd thought were secret. Evelyn had discovered that the power to expose was often more effective than the power to punish. Courts could be bought, and juries intimidated, but public documentation lived forever. Marcus had returned from retirement to help manage operations, his weathered face showing satisfaction at serving someone who actually valued his integrity. Catherine worked as her personal assistant, no longer a frightened maid but a confident young woman learning how influence actually functioned. Even Selina had stayed, using her insider knowledge of how people recruited and manipulated others to help identify schemes before they could fully develop. On this particular afternoon, Helena visited with news from court. Pemberton's trial concluded yesterday. 15 years imprisonment, all titles and assets stripped, banned from politics for life. The foreign merchants he worked with have been expelled from the kingdom. His co-conspirators are facing similar charges. Evelyn looked up from the case file she'd been reviewing. How did he take it? Badly. Helena's smile was grim. He spent most of the sentencing hearing claiming he was being persecuted for political reasons. The irony appears lost on him. It usually is. Evelyn returned her attention to the documents in front of her, a new case involving tax fraud and bribery in the northern provinces, and the investigation into how he manufactured evidence against me concluded. You're officially declared innocent of all charges. Full restoration of reputation, formal apology from the council, financial compensation for wrongful prosecution. Helena paused. They want to restore your title and estates, officially. They're calling it justice. It's political rehabilitation. Evelyn's voice was flat. They're trying to buy my silence by giving me back what they let be stolen. Tell them I'll accept the formal innocence declaration, but decline everything else. I don't want the title. I don't want the estate. I don't want to be Duchess Ashcombe again. Then what do you want to be? Evelyn set down her pen and looked at her old friend. Someone who helps people who can't fight their own battles against power. Someone who proves that careful documentation and stubborn persistence can matter even in a corrupt system. Someone who's finally useful instead of just ornamental. Helena studied her face for a long moment. You've changed so much. The woman I knew wanted justice and vindication. You seem to have found something else. I found purpose. Evelyn's voice was quiet, but certain. Justice and vindication require other people acknowledging you were right. Purpose just requires waking up every day and doing work that matters, regardless of whether anyone appreciates it. That's more sustainable. And Adrian, have you? Dead. Helena's voice was gentle. He died in prison 2 weeks ago. Infection from a wound he got in a fight with another inmate. It wasn't, she hesitated, it wasn't dramatic. Just an ugly death in an ugly place. Evelyn felt nothing at the news. No satisfaction, no grief, just the neutral acknowledgement that a chapter had closed without her needing to be present for its ending. Did he have family? Anyone who should be notified? Distant cousins who'd already claimed what assets remained. They didn't request your involvement. Good. Evelyn returned to her work. He stopped being my concern the moment he rode through those castle gates with his mistress. His death doesn't change anything. But it had changed something, even if Evelyn wouldn't fully acknowledge it. With Adrian dead and Pemberton imprisoned and her own name cleared, the war she'd been fighting for years was effectively over. The enemies were defeated. The vindication was achieved. The documentation had proven sufficient. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt the hollow recognition that victory hadn't healed anything. The years with Adrian, the betrayal, the humiliation, the desperate fight for survival, none of it was undone by winning. The past remained exactly as damaged as before, just with better legal documentation. That evening, Evelyn walked through the city alone, something she'd rarely done during her marriage or exile. The streets were busy with evening commerce, vendors closing shops, workers heading home. The ordinary pulse of people living ordinary lives uncomplicated by conspiracy and corruption. She envied them their simplicity, even as she understood she could never return to it. You learned too much. That was the cost of everything that had happened. Once you understood how power actually worked, how easily truth could be suppressed, how thoroughly the system protected its own, you couldn't unknow it. You couldn't go back to believing that justice was automatic or that good behavior would be rewarded. All you could do was document the corruption and hope that enough people cared to make documentation matter. She found herself at the river, watching water flow past with the same patient inevitability she'd tried to bring to her work. The city lights reflected on the surface, beautiful and distorted, real and illusion simultaneously. Margot found her there an hour later, having tracked her down through the protective detail Evelyn still maintained despite her protests. The older woman sat beside her on the stone embankment without speaking for several minutes. Finally, Margot broke the silence. "You're not happy. You won everything you fought for, and you're not happy." Evelyn didn't deny it. "I thought winning would feel different, like closure. Like the past 15 years would make sense once I'd proven I was right about Adrian's corruption and Pemberton's conspiracy. But it doesn't make sense. It's just damage. Documented damage, but still damage. What did you think winning would give you? Peace, maybe." The satisfaction of knowing truth mattered. Evelyn's laugh was hollow. "Instead, I just understand how much truth doesn't matter unless you force people to acknowledge it. And even then, most of them only care because ignoring it became politically inconvenient. The system didn't change. I just learned how to exploit its cracks. That's still something." Margot's voice was gentle. "You've made corruption more expensive and exposure more inevitable. You've given people tools to fight back against power that would have destroyed them. That matters." "Does it?" Evelyn gestured at the river. "Tomorrow, someone else will start scheming. Someone else will think they're clever enough to avoid documentation. Someone else will believe their position makes them untouchable. And I'll spend years building another case, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. And either way, the fundamental brokenness remains. So you're saying the work is pointless. I'm saying the work is endless. That's different." Evelyn finally looked at Margot. Pointless would mean it accomplishes nothing. Endless means it accomplishes something temporarily, and then you have to do it again, forever, because the forces creating corruption never stop. That's exhausting in a way I didn't anticipate. Margot was quiet for a moment. "You could stop. You've done enough. Take the estate, live quietly, let someone else handle the registry. You've earned rest." Evelyn considered it. Really considered it for the first time since Adrian's fall. Returning to Ravenspire Castle, managing lands and households, attending social functions where people would be carefully respectful, never quite meeting her eyes. Living as the woman who'd destroyed two powerful men and then retired to comfortable obscurity. "It sounded like death. I can't stop." Evelyn's voice was steady. "Not because I think I'll fix everything, but because stopping means accepting that documentation doesn't matter unless I'm there forcing people to look at it. The moment I step back, someone will start erasing what we've built. Not dramatically, just through quiet suppression and careful narrative control. I have to stay because the alternative is watching everything become irrelevant. That's not martyrdom. That's just stubbornness." "Maybe they're the same thing." Evelyn stood, brushing off her skirt. "Or maybe stubbornness is just what martyrdom looks like when you're too practical to die for your cause and too committed to abandon it. Either way, I'm not stopping." They walked back through the darkening streets together. Two women who'd built something significant from documentation and determination and the sheer refusal to let powerful people rewrite history to suit their convenience. Look. 1 year after Pemberton's conviction, the registry had expanded to 3 cities and employed 47 people. They'd exposed 6 major corruption cases, prevented 4 schemes through early intervention, and built a reputation that made dishonest officials nervous simply by existing. Evelyn managed it all with the same patient precision she'd once used to document Adrian's crimes. Careful record-keeping, strategic timing, absolute refusal to be intimidated. She'd also stopped sleeping well. The work was endless, the threats constant, the weight of responsibility crushing. Every case meant someone's livelihood or freedom or life, and every decision about which investigations to pursue meant others would go unexposed. The math was brutal and inescapable. On the anniversary of Adrian's death, an event she'd noted only because Catherine marked it on the calendar, Evelyn stood in her office late at night, surrounded by active case files, and allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. She was tired, not physically, though that too. Tired in the deep structural way that came from years of fighting battles that never quite ended. Tired of being the person people turned to when power abused them. Tired of building cases and exposing corruption and watching new schemes emerge before the old ones were fully prosecuted. Tired of being the woman defined by what she'd survived and what she'd exposed rather than who she'd wanted to be before any of this started. The knock on her door came precisely at midnight. Helena entered without waiting for permission, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She poured without speaking, handed one to Evelyn, and sat in the chair across from the desk. They drank in silence for several minutes. Finally, Helena spoke. "You look like someone contemplating either murder or retirement. Since you've already destroyed most of your enemies, I'm guessing retirement." Evelyn's smile was tired. "Is it that obvious? Only to people who've known you since before you became the kingdom's conscience." Helena refilled both glasses. "What's stopping you?" "Guilt, probably." Evelyn gestured at the case files. "All these people counting on me to investigate their situations. All the work that won't get done if I step away. All the corruption that will flourish if the registry loses credibility. The registry is bigger than you now. It has infrastructure, staff, momentum. It'll survive without you running it personally. But will it remain uncorrupted?" "That's the question that keeps me awake." Evelyn's voice was raw. "I've spent years proving that documentation and persistence can fight power. But what happens when I'm not there enforcing that standard? When someone offers my successor enough money or threatens them sufficiently? The whole thing could become exactly what I've been fighting against, another tool for power to use against enemies while protecting friends. So train someone. Build structures that survive individual corruption. Make the principles more important than the personality." "I'm trying." Evelyn rubbed her eyes. "But I also know that principles without people willing to die for them are just words. And I'm tired of being willing to die for things. I want to live for something instead. What would that look like?" "I don't know." Evelyn's admission was quiet, almost shameful. "I've spent so long being defined by opposition, opposing Adrian's corruption, opposing Pemberton's conspiracy, opposing systemic abuse, that I've forgotten what it means to build something that isn't fundamentally about tearing down something else." Helena studied her old friend's face. "Then maybe it's time to remember. Not by abandoning the registry, but by letting it become what you built it to be instead of what you need it to be. Give yourself permission to be something other than the kingdom's avenging angel." The words settled over Evelyn like a blanket, comfortable and suffocating simultaneously. Permission to be something else. To define herself by creation rather than documentation. To wake up pursuing goals instead of exposing crimes. It sounded impossible. It sounded necessary. 18 months after Pemberton's conviction, Evelyn stepped down as director of the registry. She remained on the advisory board, available for consultation, but the daily management passed to a younger woman, a former court researcher who'd lost her position for refusing to falsify records, someone who understood documentation's power and had her own reasons to value truth over convenience. The transition was harder than Evelyn had anticipated. For weeks, she found herself checking on cases, offering unsolicited advice, unable to fully release control. But gradually, she learned to step back, to trust that the infrastructure she'd built could function without her constant supervision. And then she had to figure out what to do with freedom she'd never actually wanted. She tried returning to Ravenspire Castle briefly, but the space felt wrong. too full of Adrian's ghost and her own trauma. The servants were respectful but distant, unable to reconcile the Duchess they'd known with the woman who'd become something else entirely. After 3 weeks, she left again, feeling relief rather than loss. She traveled for a while, moving through cities where no one recognized her, where she was just another woman of means with no particular importance. It was disorienting and oddly peaceful. No one asking her to investigate their employer, no one bringing her evidence of schemes, just ordinary days filled with ordinary concerns. But ordinary felt wrong too, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. She found herself in a coastal city eventually, watching ships come and go from the harbor, carrying goods and people and stories between nations. The rhythm of it was soothing, the patient accumulation of commerce and connection, building prosperity through small transactions repeated endlessly.